Rhaegar Targaryen felt the wild thunder of his heart echo inside the rubied plate of his armor. The rush of adrenaline across the battlefield was unlike any music he had ever heard, even though the song of steel and screams had always struck him as monstrous. His silver-gold hair clung to his forehead in damp strands beneath his helm, and blood spattered his cheek, though he couldn't say whether it was his own or his enemy's. The waters of the Trident roiled around him, red and frothing with the gore of fallen soldiers. All along its banks lay the dead and the dying, both Targaryen loyalists and Robert Baratheon's rebels. In the swirl of war cries, the shriek of horses, the clang and crunch of weapons biting through steel, Rhaegar heard only the piercing ring of prophecy in his head. The priests of Aralor told tales of the prince that was promised. The Valankar prophecies from the faith in Old Town, half-remembered lines from ancient texts, all these riddles haunted his nights. Yet in this moment, he found no clarity in prophecy. There was only survival, only the thunderous challenge: defeat the rebel, or the realm would be torn asunder. He looked across the river, its waters tinted with blood, as the sunlight glared hard on the rippling surface. Robert Baratheon stood in the shallows, a hulking figure, his hammer trailing rivulets of crimson. The man's eyes burned with ferocity, a primal, unstoppable hatred fueled by vengeance for Lyanna Stark, by wounded pride, and by the promise of a crown if he could just crush Rhaegar's chest. Rhaegar's breathing came ragged, chest heaving beneath plate and mail. He'd spent days marching to this confrontation, countless nights in feverish thought of how best to end this war swiftly. Prophecy had led him here, to a crossing that would define the future of Westeros. He had cause in every fiber of his being to stand victorious. His wife, Elia Martell, and their children, Rhaenys and Aegon, needed him. The entire kingdom needed him. He had neglected duties before, but no more. He urged his horse forward. His mount snorted and pawed at the bloody waters. They were thigh-deep on Robert's side, where the rebels had choked the crossing. Rhaegar's men flanked him, battered but still loyal. Robert's forces were a ragged ring around him, a scattering of Stormlanders, a few lords of the Reach who had turned their cloaks. On a distant bank, the banners of House Stark and House Tully whipped in a brisk wind, though the swirling dust of the battlefield obscured the details. He glimpsed the direwolf standard somewhere along the ridge, recognized the shape of the trout sigil flickering, half hidden among soldiers. Lord Eddard Stark would be there, fighting side by side with his friend. Wounded knights lay moaning underfoot as Rhaegar nudged his horse nearer. He had learned that warfare was no romantic tapestry. There was only mud, stink, blood, and the terrifying gamble of life and death. No silver harp's song could ever capture the desperation. And desperation indeed shone in Robert's eyes. The man's warhammer was coated in gore. The head seemed to drip with fresh blood. Whose blood had that hammer spilled? Rhaegar thought of the loyal men he had brought to the Trident, men who believed in him, who believed that the rightful king or prince must quell this rebellion for the good of the realm. Robert gave a guttural bellow, something halfway between a roar and a war cry. He advanced, water splashing up around his greaves, the crashing waves flecking the air. Rhaegar felt his face twist in something near a snarl. Today, it would end. He spurred his horse, driving it full tilt through the swirling water to meet the rebel. If he hesitated, if he faltered, Robert's hammer would come crashing down, and the realm would be lost. Their weapons collided. Robert swung with all the savage might in his barrel-like arms, seeking to crush Rhaegar's chest, just as he had in many of the stories that would be told if Robert emerged triumphant. But Rhaegar had learned from their last encounter. He pivoted in his saddle, raising his sword to parry the blow. Sparks flew. The force nearly tore the blade from Rhaegar's hand, pain jolting up his arm. He gritted his teeth, drawing upon every practiced flourish of skill from years of training. He twisted his wrist, slashing downward. Robert spun to the side, water cascading as he blocked with the thick haft of the warhammer. They circled each other. The men around them had come to a hush, or seemed to, for this moment was a battle in itself, a challenge that would decide the rightful victor. Dust from the banks and the tang of iron in the air suffused Rhaegar's senses. Robert charged. Rhaegar met him halfway, sword biting into the hammer's iron head. For a moment, it was locked, sword scraping metal, each straining with adrenaline and fear. A single miscalculation could lead to a shattered skull or a cleaved chest. Rhaegar turned his blade, forcing Robert's hammer aside. He let his horse leap forward, and he slashed. He felt a satisfying vibration as the edge cut into Robert's shoulder. Robert let out a shout. Blood ran freely, staining his surcoat. But it was not a mortal wound. The man was too thick with muscle. A hush fell upon the banks for a heartbeat, and Rhaegar took that moment to draw a ragged breath. Sweat streaked his temples, and he could taste salt on his lips. Fear, sweat, or tears, he couldn't say. War was chaos, but sometimes in the midst of such chaos, there came a stark moment of clarity. Rhaegar realized in that moment that he was actually winning. Robert was wounded, unsteady. The rebel king was no unstoppable force of destiny. He was just a man, battered and bleeding. "You took her," Robert snarled, a strangled fury in his voice. "You took Lyanna. I will kill you for it. By the gods, I will." Rhaegar didn't let him finish. He had no time for regrets, no breath for explaining truths that no one else would ever believe. He swung again, and Robert parried, that hammer whistling in a counterstrike. This time, Rhaegar tensed his entire body and moved his mount sideways. The blow that had shattered so many loyal knights crashed into empty air. Rhaegar brought the sword down in a savage arc. He felt the jolt in his arms as the blade bit flesh deep. Robert's cry tore through the din. He staggered back, falling to one knee. The watchers on the banks gasped. The splash of water from Robert's collapsing form soaked Rhaegar's mare. Her ears pinned back at the commotion, but Rhaegar held her steady. Robert tried once more to heave his hammer upward, but his arm trembled, blood spurting from the open gash in his side. Rhaegar's eyes flickered from Robert's face to the blood. So much blood. He had ended men before, but never one so significant to the realm. There was a destiny in Robert's demise, if that was what he chose. The realm would not soon forget the day Rhaegar Targaryen slew Robert Baratheon. Yet in Robert's face, Rhaegar saw only madness and desperation. He drew in a breath. Part of him wished to show mercy, to capture Robert and hold him prisoner until the realm was at peace. But the man's eyes spoke a vow of hatred that would never relent, not so long as Robert drew breath. Rhaegar thought of the thousands dead, the lords he had executed for treason, the alliances Robert forged on lies and half-truths, and all the devastation visited upon the realm. Mercy was a gift that could not be given lightly. He steeled himself. He thrust his sword through Robert's heart. The rebel's mouth gaped open, as though to issue one last curse, or to speak Lyanna's name. But only a wordless rasp came. In the hush, Rhaegar pulled his sword free, and Robert's body sagged face first into the bloody waters of the Trident. A roar erupted along the Targaryen lines. Trumpets and horns sounded. Rhaegar took a moment to look skyward and exhale a trembling breath he had not known he held. His hands shook, and he glanced down to see the rubies in his armor still intact, glimmering in the midday sun, flecked with water and gore. Any illusions about the romantic nature of war were thoroughly dashed. Victory was an ugly, savage thing, yet he couldn't deny the relief coursing through him. If Robert Baratheon had triumphed, House Targaryen might have ended here, drowned in the waters of the Trident, dethroned and discredited. The immediate aftermath was a swirl of confusion. The rebel lines began to break. Some threw down their arms in despair. Others fought on valiantly, refusing to acknowledge the loss of their would-be king. But the men with the largest measure of sense made for a retreat. Rhaegar caught a glimpse of Eddard Stark's banner. The man was rallying his troops to withdraw in good order, trying to salvage what remained of their cause. This was not a decisive end to the entire rebellion. Stark and Jon Arryn and others would still be out there. But with Robert gone, it was a blow to their morale that might never be mended. Rhaegar's knights charged forward, cutting down rebels, capturing lords. The swirl of the river grew calmer as the worst of the carnage subsided. Trumpets blasted out Targaryen victory calls. Rhaegar, still astride his horse, surveyed the aftermath. On the shore, men cheered his name. Some chanted, "Aegon, Aegon," the name of his infant son, already dreaming of a stable line of succession. In that moment, with the water stinking of copper, with bodies floating downstream, Rhaegar felt no exultation, only a weary sadness that it had come to this. He dipped his sword low in an unspoken sign of acknowledgement for the men who had perished here. Then he turned, reining in his mount. Behind him, Ser Barristan Selmy, wounded but alive, spurred his own horse closer. Selmy's face was streaked with grime, blood caked on one side. "You did what you had to do, Your Grace," said Barristan softly, though his voice was ragged. Rhaegar offered a nod. "He gave me no choice." He swallowed, glancing over the sea of bodies. The rebellion had begun with talk of an abduction and dishonor, claims Rhaegar had wanted to refute. But the time for talk was over. Now, with Robert dead, the realm required a new path forward. "We must ensure the rest of them lay down their arms," Rhaegar continued, voice low so only Barristan could hear over the tumult. "See that we show mercy where we can. Enough blood has been spilled." "Men," Barristan bowed. "It will be done." Rhaegar wiped his sword on the cloak of a fallen rebel. Then he raised it high. "Victory," he called out, forcing the words through a throat tight with emotion. "Victory for the realm." The men around him took up the cheer, ragged at first, and then swelling, echoing across the battlefield. The Targaryen banners flapped in the wind, the red dragon on a black field roaring its triumphant challenge. Rhaegar wondered if the ancestors were proud, or if they wept for the devastation of another savage war in the Seven Kingdoms. But he had no time for reflection. A new age was dawning, and it demanded a strong hand to guide Westeros out of the flames of rebellion. The march south was a slow, grueling affair. Word spread quickly of Robert Baratheon's death on the Trident. Some pockets of resistance simply melted away, lords bending the knee in haste. Others held out, either out of pride or fear of retribution. But with each passing day, Rhaegar's army grew as loyal bannermen rallied to the prince, who would one day be king, eager to be on the winning side. They marched along the King's Road, battered but resolute, carrying wounded in wagons, horses carefully guided to avoid further exhaustion. Rhaegar rode in silence much of the time, alone in his thoughts. He was not yet the king. His father, Aerys II, still sat the Iron Throne. But the realm had little love for the Mad King's cruelties. Rhaegar had heard the vile rumors, how his father had threatened to burn King's Landing to the ground rather than allow the rebels to take it, how every whisper of treason was met with sadistic punishments. Many lords had turned to Robert not only because they were outraged by the rumored kidnapping of Lyanna Stark, but also because they despised the king's madness. Rhaegar's future was thus precarious. He had to secure peace. He had to show the realm that mercy and reason were still alive in House Targaryen. So as they advanced toward King's Landing, Rhaegar dispatched ravens across the realm, proclaiming an official pardon to any lord who had supported the rebels, but who would now bend the knee. He asked each lord to come to the city or to send a representative to negotiate terms. Many did so cautiously. Others, such as Tywin Lannister, maintained a careful silence, waiting to see which way the wind would truly blow. Rhaegar learned from his father's mistakes, and from his own. No more would he vanish on odd pursuits that only fueled rumor and speculation. The realm needed him present, an anchor in uncertain times. He set up a makeshift command tent each evening, inviting counsel from loyal lords, from the Kingsguard, from any man who had the sense or wit to offer prudent ideas. A new approach to governance, one that might unify the Seven Kingdoms under a single vision. Still, the specter of Lyanna Stark haunted him. He did not speak of her openly. He did not offer public proclamations of her whereabouts or condition. That was a matter far too delicate and complicated, and he did not trust the realm to believe him if he tried to explain. The official narrative was that she had died tragically. That was what the realm believed. But in truth, Rhaegar had never wanted it to unfold as it had. The love he bore for Lyanna had been tangled with prophecy and the illusions of youth, overshadowed by a war that consumed everyone. In time, he told himself, the truth might come out. But for now, House Stark was more foe than friend, and Eddard Stark would hardly accept a mere apology for the part Rhaegar had played in Lyanna's fate. If the realm were to heal, that wound might need to remain carefully bandaged. As Rhaegar's host drew near to King's Landing, they found refugees fleeing in every direction, terrified by rumors of coming bloodshed. They were equally surprised when Rhaegar's knights offered them protection, rather than lashing out at them as potential rebels. "You are under the protection of the crown," Rhaegar's soldiers said, offering bread and direction to keep them safe. An uneasy hush spread through the city at news that it was the prince, not the king, who was ensuring the small folk did not starve or suffer. The seeds of loyalty were planted in such small acts. King's Landing itself rose before them in a haze of dust and smoke, the sprawl of hovels and narrow streets overshadowed by the Red Keep on Aegon's high hill. Rhaegar's stomach churned with dread. He knew his father well enough to guess the man would greet him with suspicion, paranoia, and likely a demand for harsh retribution upon the rebels. But Rhaegar intended to see a new era dawn, an era of rebuilding and unity, not cruelty and fear. When he led the vanguard to the city gates, the gold cloak stood uncertainly, glancing up at the prince in shining, if dented, armor. Some parted way as though expecting Rhaegar to storm the city. Yet he reined in his horse with a raised hand. Sir Barristan and Sir Arthur Dayne, the Kingsguard, flanked him. "We come in victory and peace," Rhaegar called up to them. "Open the gates, by order of your prince and rightful heir to the throne." A hush. Then the gates rumbled open. King's Landing, uneasy and battered by rumors, allowed the triumphant forces inside. Rhaegar led a procession through the main thoroughfare. Small folk peered out from alleyways, some cowering, some cheering, for they had heard the stories of Robert's defeat. Women wept at the memory of rapine and pillage that accompanied war, but Rhaegar's men kept discipline. They had strict orders to maintain order and punish any wrongdoing swiftly. In the heavy silence, thousands of eyes followed them. Within the Red Keep's walls, King Aerys awaited them upon the Iron Throne, flanked by Grand Maester Pycelle and a scattering of lords and courtiers who had not fled the city. The great hall was lit with torches, but there was no warmth in their flickering flames. Rhaegar advanced, bowing low to the king, aware of the tension that crackled in the air. Aerys's once silver hair hung in ragged wisps around his gaunt face. His nails were overgrown, yellowed claws. He had lost the regal bearing he once possessed, replaced by an unsettling glint of suspicion. "My son has returned from the Trident," Aerys intoned, his voice cracked and echoing. "The traitors are vanquished, then, or do they still fester in the corners of the realm?" Rhaegar rose from his bow, standing straight. "Robert Baratheon is dead, father. The realm needs a new approach, so we might avoid further bloodshed. I have promised pardons to many who lay down arms. I intend to unify the kingdoms again." Aerys's eyes flickered with fury. "Pardons." He spat the word. "Traitors deserve only fire and blood. Had I my way, I would have roasted them all. Roasted them in the Red Keep if they dared approach, turned every city that defied me into ash. You think them deserving of mercy, Rhaegar?" A hush fell. Rhaegar caught sight of Varys in the shadows, the spy master's expression unreadable. Pycelle stood wringing his hands, uncertain. The lords fidgeted, some fearful of the king's temper, others glancing hopefully at the prince. Rhaegar knew this was a precipice. The entire realm waited on what might happen next. He took a step forward, meeting his father's gaze. "I do. These men might have rebelled, but they are still subjects of the crown. We must show the realm that we are not tyrants. Mercy now will prevent another rebellion." Aerys's lips peeled back in a snarl. "You speak like a dreamer. I'm the king. They have all conspired against me, every last one of them. Even you, perhaps." The king's words were a blade in Rhaegar's heart, but he remained resolute. "I am your son. I have fought to preserve the realm, our realm. But the battles have cost us too much. Mercy will bring stability." "Nine." Aerys stared down at him for a moment that stretched uncomfortably. Rhaegar felt the tension in every joint of his body. At last, The king gave a bitter laugh, a hollow, scathing sound that echoed off the stone columns. "Very well," he said, in a tone that promised no such thing as acceptance. "Bring them to the city, these traitors, if you wish. Let them bend the knee. We shall see who is deserving of your mercy. But remember, Rhaegar, the fires of the dragon pit have not been lit in many a year. Betray me, and I will burn this city to the ground." "I know." Rhaegar bowed stiffly. He could feel the gazes of courtiers, the hush of watchers in the hall. He wondered if they realized how close they stood to a cataclysm. For the time being, Aerys was humoring him, or perhaps simply lacked the strength to oppose him openly. But a confrontation was inevitable. "Thank you, Father," Rhaegar said quietly. He withdrew. Lords parted before him, bowing and scraping, whispering their relief that the prince had returned with victory. Rhaegar feigned composure. Inside he wrestled with an unsettling certainty. The realm would never find peace with Aerys upon the throne. In the days that followed, negotiations began. Loyalists who had hid in fear emerged to welcome Prince Rhaegar as a savior. Some rebellious lords, uncertain what the future would hold, sent envoys to King's Landing, tentatively hoping for pardon. Eddard Stark, however, remained in the field. Jon Arryn likewise had yet to make a move. The deaths of Robert and many rebellious lords on the Trident had indeed shattered the rebellion's main thrust. But pockets of resistance persisted in the Vale and in the north. Rhaegar was faced with a choice: press the advantage with force, or continue to extend the hand of mercy. He refused to stain the realm with further bloodshed when the war was already, for all intents and purposes, won. So he sent out fresh ravens, personally addressed to Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn. He offered terms: lay down arms, come to King's Landing. In return he would pardon them and ensure the North and the Vale retained their traditional rights. He went so far as to promise that House Baratheon would remain lords of the Stormlands, with Stannis Baratheon recognized as the rightful heir to that seat if he came to kneel. The response was not immediate. Days crawled by. The city was restless, uncertain. King Aerys lurked in his chambers, rarely appearing except to launch tirades about traitors and conspiracies. Rhaegar poured his energies into re-establishing the crown's authority, meeting with merchants, bankers from Braavos, the Faith's High Septon, and men of rank who drifted into the capital. He wanted them to know that the crown was stable in the person of Prince Rhaegar, if not the king. His wife, Elia Martell, arrived from Dragonstone with their children. She was pale and anxious, though she tried to hide it behind a gentle smile. Rhaegar embraced her, relief washing over him. For a moment, he wished he could vanish into a private life with his family, free from the weight of the realm. But that was not his destiny, nor his duty. Elia sensed his burden. "The city is full of whispers," she confided one evening, as they stood upon a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay. The setting sun painted the sky in pink and purple hues. "They say that your father grows more erratic by the day, that some fear he will burn us all if you do not act." Rhaegar's jaw tensed. "He might. He threatens as much. But I have to be cautious. Aerys still holds the throne officially. If I move openly against him, half the realm will see me as a usurper. I must do this carefully, for the sake of our children, of everyone." "Downed?" Elias' eyes flickered with concern. "There is another rumor, that you plan to call a great council and have your father declared unfit. Is it possible?" He exhaled. "Perhaps. But I need enough support from the great houses. If the lords believe the realm will be safer with me, they may back me. But as long as these pockets of rebellion remain, they might fear another war. I must quell these uncertainties, show them that peace under my rule is preferable to strife under my father." "Bencham." Elia reached for his hand, gently squeezing. "I believe in you," she whispered. He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Thank you, Elia. I only hope the realm will see what I'm trying to do." Days later, an answer arrived, in the form of Eddard Stark himself. The Lord of Winterfell entered King's Landing at the head of a small retinue. His expression was guarded, his posture rigid as he marched into the Red Keep. Word spread like wildfire, the wolf in the capital. But Eddard came not to wage war, but to treat with Prince Rhaegar. It was the first glimmer that the North might yet bend rather than continue shedding blood. Rhaegar received Stark in Maegor's holdfast, away from the Iron Throne. He did not wish to subject the man to Aerys madness, nor put the king in a position to spontaneously sentence Stark to death. So they met in a modest hall, flanked by only a few guards. Eddard's gray eyes flicked around, wary. Rhaegar saw the tension in him. The man had lost many friends in this war, Robert among them. Perhaps Eddard had loved Robert like a brother. What must he think of the prince who had slain him? Still, Eddard bent his knee, albeit stiffly. "Your grace." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Lord Stark, arise." Stark stood, face grim. "I have come because I wish to see an end to this war. The North will not forget the injustices done to my family. My father and brother burned alive by your father's command. My sister lost." He trailed off, jaw tightening. "But for the sake of our people, I am willing to hear your terms." Rhaegar's voice was quiet. "I cannot bring back the dead. If I could, I would. I had no hand in the execution of your father and brother. That was my father's doing, and I grieve it. As for your sister," he paused, uncertain whether to speak the truth of Lyanna's fate. In the end, he chose caution. "I regret what transpired. I never wished for it to cause such a war. I will offer you pardons, and your North shall remain unmolested. You will retain all your rights and titles. In return, you shall declare fealty to the crown. Let us forge a new beginning." A tension hung in the air. Eddard's mouth was a thin line. "And your father, the king? What does he say to this?" "Nonsense. He has agreed to pardon those who bend the knee," Rhaegar replied, omitting how tenuous that agreement was. "He is grateful the realm is saved from further treachery." Stark did not look reassured. "I will not see my men burned as your father burned mine. If I kneel, it must be to you, Prince Rhaegar, and not to Aerys. I cannot trust him." Rhaegar nodded slowly. "I understand. I assure you, I will uphold the agreement. I will protect the North from any retribution. As soon as it can be arranged, I intend to hold a great council. There, the lords of the realm may decide whether my father is fit to rule, or if the regency should pass to me." "That's..." Eddard exhaled. He seemed to weigh 1,000 memories and regrets. Then he sank to one knee again, more deliberately this time. "Then, for the sake of my people, I will bend the knee. I pray we do not come to regret it." Rhaegar rested a hand on his shoulder in a brief gesture of respect. "Thank you, Lord Stark. The realm will remember this day, when a man of honor chose peace over vengeance." Peace, however, was not an immediate guarantee. The day after Eddard Stark's submission, King Aerys erupted in a frenzy, demanding Stark be thrown into the black cells, raging that Rhaegar had conspired to betray him. Only through swift action by the Kingsguard and a handful of loyal lords did Rhaegar quell his father's outburst. Rumors circulated that the king had tried to summon pyromancers again. Fear gnawed at the courtiers. But Eddard Stark was spared, and the North recognized Rhaegar's authority. It was the first step of many. Jon Arryn came next, swayed by Eddard's decision. The Vale was weary of war, and with Robert gone, there was little point in continuing the fight. Many Stormlords likewise laid down their arms, for they would not stand alone against the crown. Stannis Baratheon, always the dutiful brother, had no love for House Targaryen, but he was practical. He knelt before Prince Rhaegar, under the watchful eyes of 6 witnesses in the Great Hall, after which Rhaegar confirmed him as Lord of Storm's End. One by one, most of the realm's great houses realigned themselves under the Targaryen banner. House Tyrell had already supported Rhaegar in large part, though some lesser lords had joined Robert. The Tyrells, seeing the writing on the wall, quickly affirmed their loyalty. House Martell was bound by marriage to Rhaegar, though the loss of Elia's kin who had died supporting the Targaryens, or in earlier skirmishes, weighed heavily. Doran Martell, from Sunspear, wrote a careful letter expressing hope that Rhaegar would bring justice and peace for all. House Greyjoy remained aloof, as usual, but Balon Greyjoy sent a terse raven acknowledging the crown. The only true uncertainty was Tywin Lannister. The Lord of Casterly Rock had not declared for the rebels, nor had he come to King's Landing. He had simply waited, letting the war play out. Now that Rhaegar was ascendant, Tywin dispatched a polite letter expressing relief at the restoration of peace and offering to attend the Great Council if invited. No doubt Tywin was waiting to see how the matter of King Aerys would resolve, for Tywin and Aerys had a complicated history. Rhaegar, in turn, carefully extended an invitation, cautious that the Lannisters could tip the balance in the coming political struggle. Thus the stage was set for the Great Council. A hush fell over the realm, as though all of Westeros held its breath, waiting to see whether the madness of King Aerys would finally be put aside in favor of Prince Rhaegar's new vision for unity. The lords arrived in King's Landing over a tense fortnight. Banners of every color fluttered around the city's walls. The streets overflowed with knights, men-at-arms, and curious onlookers. There was fear that the king might lash out, so Rhaegar quietly expanded the city watch, ensuring loyal men guarded the gates. Then, at last, the day came. The Great Council of 283 AC, called by the prince, not the king. Aerys had wanted no part of it, but Rhaegar had convinced him that it would be an opportunity to root out traitors and confirm the king's rightful authority. Whether Aerys truly believed that or simply wanted to see who would dare stand against him remained unclear. They convened in the Dragon Pit, atop Rhaenys' hill. The ruinous shell of the once proud Targaryen legacy had been prepared for a massive gathering. Chairs and tables were arranged in a wide circle, with a dais at one end for the king and prince. Soldiers ringed the perimeter, alert for any sign of trouble. Thousands of spectators filled the stands, from courtiers to curious small folk who had bribed or begged their way in. A hush descended when the king arrived. Aerys, wearing the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, seated himself upon an elevated throne made specifically for this occasion. Prince Rhaegar sat at his right, wearing simpler attire, a dark velvet doublet with the three-headed dragon sigil. The lords began to speak, to put forth their concerns. One by one they recounted the outrages inflicted by the king in recent years, the burning of Lord Stark and his son, the paranoia and arbitrary executions, the rumored plan to use wildfire on King's Landing itself. Some lords demanded the king be brought to trial. Others spoke more cautiously, suggesting the king might need guidance, a regency of sorts. Aerys himself sneered from the dais, occasionally letting loose a shrill cackle. Rhaegar's heart pounded with each passing accusation, knowing that any moment, the king might order the pyromancers to set the entire dragon pit aflame. Lord Tywin Lannister spoke in measured tones, reminding the assembly of the horrors the realm had suffered when a mad Targaryen led them. He did not explicitly call for Aerys' removal, but his words seemed to nudge the gathered lords toward that conclusion. Eddard Stark spoke more simply, testifying to the king's complicity in the deaths of his father and brother. His voice trembled with repressed anger, but it was earnest. Others added their own stories. The rancor in the dragon pit grew thick. Finally, Rhaegar stood. His voice cut through the rising tumult with calm clarity. "My lords, we have heard the accusations. We know the realm trembles under the weight of what has come before. Yet we must find a course that protects our people from further bloodshed. I do not wish to see my father humiliated, nor do I seek to usurp the rightful Targaryen line. I ask only that we, as the guardians of Westeros, unite in ensuring the crown is guided by wisdom and mercy. If my father's health is such that he cannot rule, let us ask the council to appoint a regent." "Determo." Aerys shot to his feet, spittle at the corners of his mouth. "You dare speak of regents, traitor, traitorous son. You would brand me as mad, turn my lords against me. I should have you executed, you worthless." His words descended into a barrage of shrieks. Chaos followed. Some lords rose, outraged at the king's threats. The gold cloaks tensed. But Rhaegar did not back down. He reached out gently, placing a hand on his father's arm, trying to calm him. Aerys struck his hand away. "You will not touch me," the king hissed, eyes bulging. "Guards! Guards, seize him!" But the guards did not obey. The king's guard looked instead to Sir Gerald Hightower and Sir Barristan Selmy, who did not move. In that charged instant, the fate of House Targaryen hung in the balance. Finally, Lord Commander Hightower stepped forward, going to one knee. "Forgive me, your grace, but your orders would turn all against you. We are sworn to protect the king, but also the realm. Prince Rhaegar has its best interests at heart. We cannot comply." Aerys let out a shriek that seemed half human, half beast. He tried to lunge forward, to brand the Lord Commander a traitor as well, but his limbs shook, and he collapsed back onto his throne, frothing. Grand Maester Pycelle hurried to the king's side, though more out of obligation than any real hope of remedy. The king trembled, eyes rolling. It might have been a fit, or perhaps the final unraveling of his mind. The dragon pit erupted in confusion. Some lords rushed forward. Others stepped back in fear. Rhaegar took a deep breath. "My lords, you have seen it for yourselves. My father is not fit to rule. In the name of the realm, I must assume the regency. I beg your support in guiding the Seven Kingdoms into an era free of terror. Any who object, speak now." The hush was deafening. Lord Tywin Lannister was the first to speak. "House Lannister supports Prince Rhaegar's claim to regency." Eddard Stark spoke next. "The North will not bend to a mad king. We stand with Prince Rhaegar in seeking peace and justice." One by one, the other great houses echoed that sentiment. The hall reverberated with the lords' agreement. Some spoke half-heartedly, others wholeheartedly. Even Pycelle, kneeling over the king's spasming form, said nothing in objection. Perhaps a younger Aerys might have commanded enough fear or loyalty to sway them, but not this husk of a man. And so the Great Council proclaimed Prince Rhaegar Targaryen as regent of the Seven Kingdoms, with full authority to govern in the king's stead until such time as the king might recover or a new succession was established. That night, it was done. King Aerys was confined under careful watch. Prince Rhaegar, by the will of the council, took on the responsibilities of the crown. The small folk cheered him in the streets, for they believed he had saved them from the Mad King's threatened wildfire. The lords breathed a sigh of collective relief, hoping that now they might rebuild after the devastation of rebellion. Thus began the regency of Rhaegar Targaryen, a turning point for the realm that would echo through the histories. The months that followed were a frenzied whirlwind of governance. Rhaegar assembled a new small council, appointing men he believed capable and just. He named Jon Connington as Hand of the King, recalling the young lord from exile. For though he had once failed to capture Robert, his loyalty to Rhaegar remained proven, and Connington had learned from his mistakes. He kept Varys as Master of Whisperers, for the realm was rife with conspiracies, and Rhaegar needed the spider's web of knowledge. He offered Eddard Stark a seat on the council as Master of Laws, but Eddard politely declined, explaining he must return to Winterfell to care for his people. Instead, Rhaegar appointed a seasoned judge from the Crown Lands to the post. For Master of Coin, he turned to a lesser-known but shrewd steward, a man recommended by Tywin Lannister, though Rhaegar remained cautious about Tywin's advice. He took steps to ensure the faith was appeased, granting the High Septon a private audience to reaffirm the crown's respect for the Seven. He also opened negotiations with the Iron Bank of Braavos, hoping to refinance the crown's debts in more favorable terms. And he arranged relief efforts for war-torn areas, sending royal provisions north to Riverland's villages devastated by the fighting. The Targaryen coffers were not bottomless, but Rhaegar hoped such gestures would mend wounds. All the while, King Aerys languished in his secluded chambers in the Red Keep. Grand Maester Pycelle claimed the king was too ill to appear in public. Rumors swirled that Aerys raved day-night about traitors, that he scratched himself until he bled, that he refused to eat unless the food was tasted thrice for poison. Rhaegar visited occasionally, trying to speak with him, but each time, the king only cursed him as a usurper. There could be no reconciliation. For all appearances, the realm was stable under Rhaegar's regency. Yet stability was not enough. The devastation of the rebellion lingered. Crops had been burned, trade disrupted, families torn apart. And though Robert was dead, his cause still had some sympathy among the small folk who had believed him a heroic champion. Rhaegar recognized that healing the realm would require time and a new sense of shared purpose. He decided to embark on a grand progress, traveling with his retinue to key regions of Westeros, reaffirming their loyalty and witnessing their hardships firsthand. It was a bold move, as not all would welcome him with open arms. But it was the surest way to show he was not a distant or tyrannical ruler. Aelya Martell, delicate after the birth of their last child, remained in King's Landing with little Aegon and Rhaenys, but Rhaegar promised he would keep the progress as short as possible. First, he traveled to the Stormlands, meeting with Stannis Baratheon at Storm's End. The keep loomed tall and unyielding against the sea's fury, much like its master. Stannis received him with polite coolness. The younger Baratheon brother was a severe figure, jaw clenched, eyes dour. He had not forgiven the Targaryens for the rebellion, but he recognized practical realities. Rhaegar offered to help rebuild the war-torn villages in the Stormlands, an act that earned grudging respect from Stannis bannermen. Next, Rhaegar journeyed to the Reach, welcomed by Mace Tyrell and Highgarden, with feasting and tourneys. The memory of war seemed further away here, for the Reach had been spared the worst atrocities. The lords feasted Rhaegar lavishly, half in flattery, half to ensure the new regent remembered their loyalty. Rhaegar smiled politely, participated in the tournaments, but made it clear he would not be swayed by mere pageantry. He asked how the harvest fared, pressed the stewards for details on the region's surplus, hoping to arrange shipments of food to the more impoverished areas of the realm. Then came the Westerlands, where Tywin Lannister hosted Rhaegar at the grand fortress of Casterly Rock. Entering the rock, carved into the sheer face of a cliff, was like stepping into the domain of a lion indeed. The halls glinted with gold, the wealth of House Lannister on full display. Tywin greeted Rhaegar with a stately courtesy, always precise, always measured. He introduced his children: Cersei, beautiful and proud, and Tyrion, a dwarf who was evidently scorned by his father. Jaime Lannister was absent, still serving as a member of the Kingsguard, though not present in the traveling retinue. For all the civility of the meeting, Rhaegar sensed Tywin's ambition pulsing beneath the surface. The man who had once served as hand to Aerys was not content to remain overshadowed. They spoke at length about the crown's finances, about trade, about the possibility of forging a marriage alliance between the Lannisters and Targaryens. Tywin hinted that his daughter Cersei might be a suitable match for a future heir, but Rhaegar brushed it aside gracefully, reminding Tywin that he already had children by Aelya Martell. Rhaegar had no desire to set aside his wife or complicate the line of succession. Tywin, while disappointed, did not press the matter openly. When Rhaegar departed Casterly Rock, he did so with a sense of uneasy alliance. The Lannisters were too powerful and too proud to ever be fully trusted, but they were essential to the stability of the realm. At last, Rhaegar ventured north, traveling through the Riverlands, where he spent time speaking with local lords about the ravages of the war, to Harrenhal's looming ruin, and finally to Moat Cailin, the gateway to the north. Winterfell awaited him, an ancient seat that had endured countless kings. Eddard Stark greeted him in the courtyard, flanked by robed maesters and bannermen. Unlike the grand receptions in Highgarden or Casterly Rock, the North's welcome was somber but sincere. Rhaegar observed the stony walls of Winterfell, the Godswood, with its heart tree, the quiet dignity of the people who lived here. He spoke with Eddard about the North's needs: fairer taxes to account for the shorter growing seasons, better trade routes to ensure the North was not left impoverished. Rhaegar listened earnestly, promising that the crown would address these concerns. And privately, Rhaegar visited the crypts of Winterfell. There, in the cold gloom, he stood before Lyanna Stark's statue. Her likeness was carved in stone, holding a stone flower as all the Stark effigies did. The memory of her face, the sound of her laughter, flooded back. He felt a pang of guilt and regret, so deep, it nearly suffocated him. War had come because of their actions. His actions. He had loved her, believed in a prophecy that led him astray from his duties, and the cost had been immeasurable. He knelt on the dusty floor, placing a hand on the cold stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice echoing in the darkness. "I hope you can forgive me. I hope the realm can forgive me." Whether or not anyone heard his confession, the crypt offered no reply. Upon returning to King's Landing, Rhaegar found the city calmer. The regency seemed to be working. Taxes were being collected more systematically. Trade was picking up. Even the faith's rumors had quieted. Still, the matter of the king remained. Aerys was deteriorating. Pycelle insisted that madness had taken hold, and that a merciful end might be best for him. Others suggested letting him waste away in seclusion, no longer able to harm anyone. Rhaegar wrestled with his conscience. He could not bring himself to order his own father's execution, but keeping him confined in the Red Keep indefinitely would only fuel rumors and might destabilize the line of succession. The realm needed a clear transition of power. Thus, Rhaegar convened a smaller council of close advisors. Jon Connington, Sir Barristan Selmy, Varys, Pycelle, and a few trusted lords. There, they debated the question of coronation. Some argued that, to truly unite the realm, Rhaegar must be crowned king, with or without Aerys' abdication. Others suggested letting Aerys remain king in name only, ensuring Rhaegar continued as regent until the old man's natural death. But the potential chaos of leaving Aerys as a figurehead was plain. The risk of him ordering some atrocity from his sickbed was always there. At last, they agreed upon a path. The Great Council had already vested Rhaegar with regency. Now, a new gathering of the lords, and the High Septon, would be called to proclaim Rhaegar as king, citing Aerys' incapacity and the danger he posed to the realm. The Targaryen line would remain intact, with Rhaegar as the rightful successor. Once crowned, Rhaegar would keep Aerys in comfortable seclusion for the remainder of his days, attended by maesters. It was a compromise solution, exiling the Mad King within his own walls, sparing him the headsman's sword, while granting the realm the clear leadership it needed. So it was done. In the year 284 AC, Rhaegar Targaryen was crowned King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the realm. The ceremony took place in the Great Sept of Baelor Dor. The High Septon anointed him with the 7 oils. Lords from across Westeros attended: Stark, Arryn, Tully, Tyrell, Martell, Baratheon, Lannister, and many more. Eli Martell stood beside him, radiant in a gown of red and gold, their children close at hand. The city thronged with cheering crowds, who had grown to view Rhaegar as the beloved redeemer from his father's tyranny. None cheered louder than those who had endured the threat of wildfire during the rebellion. When the crown of Aegon the Conqueror was placed upon Rhaegar's head, he felt its weight keenly. In that moment, he imagined all the kings and queens who had come before him, from Aegon I to Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, even to the more troubled Targaryen kings. He thought of the mistakes they had made, the triumphs they had achieved, and he vowed to himself that he would build a realm where the horrors of war might be lessened, where justice and mercy might stand above cruelty and fear. The coronation was followed by feasting and celebration, though Rhaegar insisted these be modest compared to some lavish Targaryen feasts of old. He directed that a portion of the royal coffers be used to feed the hungry instead. Across King's Landing, bread and ale were handed out, a gesture that won more love for the new king. Tourneys were held in the city's fields, but Rhaegar did not participate, leaving the honor to younger knights who aspired to renown. He had other work to do. Once crowned, he set about a series of reforms. He strengthened the laws that protected small folk from exploitation, establishing royal justices who traveled the roads to hear complaints and resolve disputes. He decreed that the Alchemists' Guild and the Pyromancers would be heavily regulated, ensuring that no king or lord could use wildfire on a whim. He supported the Citadel's efforts to expand maester training throughout the realm, believing that knowledge and healing arts could do more for Westeros than any sword. He implemented new trade policies, lowering certain tariffs to encourage the free flow of goods, especially vital grains and livestock. He worked with the faith to root out fanaticism, careful not to antagonize them, but ensuring they did not develop an overly zealous hold on the realm. Bit by bit, these measures began to reshape the Seven Kingdoms. It was not quick, nor was it without opposition from certain lords who felt their privileges threatened. But Rhaegar persisted, relying on the loyalty of the Crown lands, the support of House Martell, and alliances forged with other regions during his progress. In the north, Eddard Stark instituted fair governance in Winterfell, quietly cooperating with the king's justices. In the Vale, Jon Arryn offered counsel, balancing the new king's idealism with practical wisdom. In the Stormlands, Stannis enforced law and order rigorously, though the memory of Robert continued to cast a shadow there. In the Reach, the Tyrells enjoyed their prosperity, content so long as Highgarden thrived. In the West, Tywin Lannister maintained a posture of respect for the crown, though none doubted he would still place Lannister interests first. In Dorne, Doran Martell welcomed the triumph of his sister Elya's husband, quietly ensuring that the loyalty of Dorne was unquestioned. And so, as year after year passed, Westeros began to recover from the chaos of the rebellion. The small folk spoke of King Rhaegar's kindness, of his silver hair shining in the sun when he rode among them in simple clothes. He listened to their grievances, occasionally stopping to play a melancholy tune on his harp, in village squares, though more rarely than in his youth. He was no simple minstrel king. He was a man tempered by the horrors of war, who recognized the weight of prophecy, but also the urgency of real governance. For the Targaryen line, stability returned. Rhaenys and Aegon grew, nurtured by Elya's care, guided by tutors from the citadel. Aegon was a bright boy, curious about the world, while Rhaenys showed a passion for the arts. The realm whispered that one day, Aegon would inherit a more peaceful kingdom, freed from the ghosts of madness and rebellion. King Aerys lingered for a few more years in his guarded chambers, fading slowly into incoherent ramblings. When he finally died, it was a quiet affair. Few mourned him, though Rhaegar ordered a proper Targaryen funeral rite. The bells tolled, and Aerys was laid to rest in the Great Sept, joining the line of kings from which he had sprung. With his passing, any lingering question about the legitimacy of Rhaegar's reign was silenced. Yet not all was perfect. Some lords grumbled about new taxes for the crown's relief efforts. Some whispered that Rhaegar's desire to build a better realm was naive, that it would never last. Rumors still circulated about what truly happened with Lyanna Stark, rumors that might threaten Rhaegar's standing with the North if the truth ever fully surfaced. And the threat from beyond the wall was a distant myth in the minds of most Southerners, but Rhaegar had read enough in the old text to keep an eye on the North, ensuring the Night's Watch was not neglected. Still, in the annals of history, the reign of King Rhaegar Targaryen would be remembered as a time of cautious optimism and gentle rebuilding. Writers would say that the dragon and the wolf had once nearly torn the realm apart, but in the end, the dragon overcame the wolf, forging a realm that might one day be strong enough to face even darker storms on the horizon. A decade into Rhaegar's reign, a new sense of Westerosi identity had begun to blossom. The roads were safer than they had been in years. Trade flourished between the Seven Kingdoms. The crown's justice, though imperfect, was more equitable than in decades past. The faith found a renewed mission in caring for the poor, rather than stoking conflicts. The hush of rebellion had faded into a distant memory for most. Of course, the seeds of new conflicts always lie dormant in the soil of peace. The ambitions of houses do not vanish overnight, and the cold winds of winter still gather beyond the wall. But for a season at least, the Seven Kingdoms knew a better peace than it had under the Mad King. They called Rhaegar the Silver Dragon, and sometimes the Conciliator, evoking the memory of the wise King Jaehaerys I. No one, not even Rhaegar, knew how long it would last. But he had done what many thought impossible. He had defeated Robert Baratheon, quelled a bloody rebellion, and rebuilt the realm under Targaryen rule. In the hearts of the people, there flickered a hopeful belief that perhaps, this time, the dragons of House Targaryen could be protectors, rather than destroyers, guardians of the realm, rather than tyrants. And in that fragile hope lay the true legacy of Rhaegar's victory at the Trident. For he had won not merely by the sword, but by the promise of something better than the madness of fire and blood. A promise at last that a Targaryen king might rule with both strength and mercy, forging a realm worthy of song. A gentle snowfall dusted the ramparts of the Red Keep, and from the highest balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, King Rhaegar Targaryen surveyed the city he had so painstakingly rebuilt. A decade had passed since he was crowned, but the years felt both swift and endless, packed with reforms and hopes and quiet fears that slumbered beneath the realm's outward calm. Before him stretched King's Landing, a sprawl of winding streets and timbered rooftops that glimmered under a pale winter sun. Thin plumes of smoke curled from the chimneys. Wagons rumbled along the main thoroughfares, laden with produce from the Crown lands and beyond. In the distance, the Blackwater Rush cut a winding path to the sea. Once, that river had run red with the blood of men who followed Robert Baratheon. Now it flowed tranquil, bearing ships and commerce from the narrow sea to the bustling docks. He stood alone, dressed not in the regalia of the Iron Throne, but in a subdued cloak trimmed with ermine. Age had touched him gently. There were faint lines at the corners of his violet eyes, and strands of silver had darkened faintly at the temples. Yet he still stood tall, broad-shouldered, with the composure of a king who had tasted both triumph and sorrow. A swirl of cold wind made him pull his cloak tighter. The hush of winter was upon them, though the southern climate rarely allowed thick blankets of snow. The days were shorter, the nights cooler. His advisors often reminded him that winter's main teeth sank into the north, not the Crown lands, but Rhaegar felt its approach nonetheless, as though the entire realm exhaled a slow breath in anticipation of something more than the changing of the seasons. Footsteps sounded behind him, light but purposeful. He turned to see Sir Jaime Lannister stepping onto the balcony. Jaime had been a Kingsguard for years now, sworn to protect first King Aerys, though those days were best left unremembered, and then Rhaegar himself. Golden-haired and handsome, Jaime wore the pristine white cloak of the Kingsguard, over gilded armor chased with monete lion heads at the shoulders. He offered a small bow. "Your Grace, the small council has assembled. They're awaiting you in the solar." Rhaegar nodded, letting one last glance drift over the city. "Thank you, Sir Jaime. I'll be along." He followed the knight back inside, warm torchlight flickering upon the stone walls. They passed tapestries of Targaryen kings, some with bright red dragons swirling among embroidered flames. Once, all of this had felt like the weight of ghosts pressing down on him. Now the Red Keep was home, though a home he strove to make more open and just than it had ever been under his father. In the solar, half a dozen voices hushed as he entered. A large round table dominated the space, piled with scrolls and ledgers. The tapestry behind it showed a stylized map of Westeros, from the wall in the north to the arbor in the south, reminding them all that the Seven Kingdoms needed ever-watchful governance. Snow clung in meltwater droplets on the windowsills, but the brazier in the center of the room lent enough heat to keep off the chill. Jon Connington, once exiled for failing Rhaegar in the days of Robert's rebellion, now served as his hand. Connington stood the moment Rhaegar arrived, giving a respectful inclination of his head. Red-haired and stern, he had aged into his role with discipline. "Your Grace," he said, stepping aside so Rhaegar could take the seat at the head of the table. Varys, Master of Whisperers, bowed more elaborately. "Your Grace, I bring tidings from across the narrow sea. Envoys of the Sea Lord of Braavos request an audience, presumably about renegotiating certain trade fees." He paused to flutter his hands in an apologetic gesture. "They also bring word of a new sellsword company forming in the disputed lands, though rumor holds it smaller than the Golden Company or the Second Sons. Still, knowledge is power, and I keep an ear on such developments." Menorni. Seated next to him, Maester Arwen, a tall, austere woman chosen for her meticulous scholarship, adjusted her chain. "We also have some matters of supply in the north to discuss, Your Grace. Lord Stark reports that the winter is harsher than in years past. There's concern about the King's Road being blocked by heavy snows." Across from them, a broad-shouldered knight in simpler clothes, Lord John Derry, newly elevated to the small council as Master of Laws, cleared his throat. "With your permission, Your Grace, we should also address the matter of the Ironborn. Lord Balon Greyjoy claims his fleets must be free to roam far for trading, but the complaints from Lannisport merchants about reaving in the Sunset Sea are growing." Rhaegar settled into his chair and held up a placating hand. "We'll address each in turn," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'd rather not see any more reaving than we must. The realm has had enough conflict." So began another day of rulership. It was a routine Rhaegar had grown accustomed to. Hearing petitions, balancing the competing needs of lords and smallfolk, striving for unity in a land historically prone to fracturing. The rebellion, once a fresh wound, had faded into memory for many. And yet, as he listened, he remained keenly aware that peace was not permanent. Conflicts brewed in the corners of the realm like storm clouds. Trade matters came first. Rhaegar heard Varys' suggestion that Braavos might be angled for a more preferential tariff deal. He asked pointed questions. How might lowering certain fees for Braavosi commerce help the crown? Might it undermine local merchants? John Connington recommended caution. Maester Arwen brought up the possibility of encouraging more local shipbuilding to avoid overdependence on foreign trade. All the while, Rhaegar observed how each voice offered partial truths. That was the nature of the council. Reconciling them into wise policy required a steady hand. Ironborn troubles came next. Balon Greyjoy had not openly rebelled since Robert's rebellion ended, but the Iron Islands had always chafed under any crown. Reports of reaving were rarely black and white. Sometimes the Ironborn raided distant coasts under the guise of ill-defined claims. Rhaegar had sent envoys in the past, but results were meager. The Master of Laws pressed for a show of force, perhaps dispatching the royal fleet to the Iron Islands as a warning. But Rhaegar was reluctant to begin a new war on the seas. He wanted to try diplomacy first, or at least extract some firm assurances from Balon. With the approach of deeper winter, the realm's resources could ill afford a naval campaign. So they decided to summon Greyjoy representatives for a formal talk, while quietly reinforcing the royal fleet at Dragonstone. A balancing act of caution and deterrence. When the council turned to the subject of the North, the tone grew more serious. Eddard Stark's letter, delivered by Raven just 2 days prior, described worsening conditions around the Long Lake and the White Knife. Snowdrifts were piling higher than in recent winters, slowing caravans and risking famine if supply lines to the north were choked off. There were also disquieting tales from the far north. Isolated wildling sightings, rumors of monstrous creatures glimpsed in the swirling snows, which the local folk took to calling White Walkers. Rhaegar's expression darkened. He remembered old texts referencing the Long Night, the Others, the ancient threat that had once beset the realm thousands of years ago. He had always harbored a lingering fear that some part of the old stories might be true, that prophecy might be more than a dream. Even so, the rational parts of him knew how such rumors could be exaggerated to stir fear. The council debated. Some, like John Derry, dismissed the notion of White Walkers as superstitious nonsense. Others, Maester Arwen in particular, argued that the Citadel's records, sparse though they were, did speak of an ancient darkness. Eddard Stark had rarely shown himself prone to flights of fancy. If he wrote of local alarm, there might be at least some kernel of truth. In the end, Rhaegar decided to do what caution demanded. Send more men to the Night's Watch by royal decree, ensuring they did not dwindle to a token force. He also authorized additional shipments of grain and supplies to the north. Better to prepare for ghosts and find none, he said, than to ignore the realm's guardians and regret it. The council agreed, though with varying degrees of enthusiasm. They spoke into the late morning. Cups of watered wine and plates of bread and cheese were passed around. Near midday, a herald knocked, announcing that Prince Aegon sought leave to enter. Rhaegar granted it. The door swung open, revealing his son, tall for 16, black-haired like his Martell heritage, but with eyes that echoed the Targaryen violet. Aegon wore a simple tunic of crimson and gold, and he carried the bearing of a youth just stepping into manhood. He bowed briefly to the assembled council, and then addressed his father. "Your Grace, might I speak with you on a matter of importance?" He glanced at the others, uncertain whether to continue in their presence. Rhaegar offered a hint of a smile, waving a hand in permission. "You may speak freely before these lords and counselors. What is it, my son?" Aegon drew a breath. I've been in correspondence with Prince Doran Martell. My uncle invites me to spend a season in Dorne, to learn more of my mother's heritage and to cement ties with House Martell. He thinks it would be valuable for me to see the region firsthand and understand their perspective. He spoke with youthful eagerness, but also a measured respect that suggested he was aware this might be a matter of politics rather than mere travel. Rhaegar let his gaze flick briefly to Jon Connington and Varys. He understood the subtext. Aegon was half Dornish by blood, and House Martell had always prided itself on independence. Strengthening the tie between the Iron Throne and Sunspear could only benefit the realm, especially if, in time, Aegon might inherit the throne. Besides, Rhaenys, Aegon's older sister by only a few years, had spent some time in Dorne, forging close friendships there. The unity between Targaryen and Martell blood could only be enriched by personal relationships. He nodded. I think it a fine idea. Travel broadens the mind, and if your Uncle Doran offers you his hospitality, it would be wise for you to accept. We'll discuss logistics, and if the council sees no objection, we'll arrange for you to depart once the roads are safe. The passes through the Dornish marches can be treacherous in winter, so we'll likely have to send you by ship from King's Landing to Sunspear. But yes, I approve. He offered his son a proud smile. You will return to us with new knowledge and a deeper bond with our Dornish kin. Aegon's face lit with satisfaction. He bowed again. Thank you, father. I'll prepare accordingly. He glanced around at the council members, then quietly withdrew. Rhaegar felt a twinge of paternal warmth. Aegon was growing quickly, soon to be a man grown, learning the sword, the harp, the laws of the realm, and the tongues of Essos. He was everything Rhaegar hoped for. Kind but not soft, curious but not reckless. If the realm ever faced a great challenge, Rhaegar believed Aegon would prove worthy. Their meeting concluded soon after. The council scattered to attend to tasks, and Rhaegar returned to his private solar with Jon Connington in tow. Connington was always direct when they were alone. As soon as the door shut behind them, he removed his gloves and began. We should speak of the Ironborn more forthrightly, Your Grace. Balon Greyjoy tests you. If you allow him too long a leash, he'll interpret it as weakness. War in the seas might not be ideal, but ignoring repeated acts of piracy will make the crown appear toothless. Rhaegar sank into a high-backed chair near the hearth, leaning his elbows on the arms. I hear you, Jon. Yet I also recall the devastation of the rebellion and the cost in coin and lives. The Greyjoys are not Robert Baratheon's rebellion. If we dispatch a fleet and burn their longships, we might unify them in open revolt. I'd sooner try negotiations and a show of measured force than spark a full uprising. Me. Connington pursed his lips. As you say, you've kept the realm at peace for a decade, and I respect that. But remember, if the Ironborn sense an advantage, they'll seize it. Balon is not as direct as Robert was, but that doesn't make him any less dangerous. I'll keep that in mind, Rhaegar said softly. We'll bring him to heel if we must. But I hope it won't come to that. Thou. Connington inclined his head. Very well. There's also another matter. The gold in our coffers is respectable, but not bottomless. With your new shipments to the north, we'll strain the budget further, and your plan to sponsor more maesters for the outlying regions has a cost as well. We can raise taxes or borrow more heavily from the Iron Bank. Either path has consequences. Rhaegar rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling the ever-present weight of governance. We can't keep raising taxes indefinitely. The realm still heals from war. I'd rather avoid saddling small folk with heavier burdens. Borrowing might be inevitable. At least the Iron Bank offers structured terms, and we've maintained good relations. Let's see if we can negotiate a more favorable rate. I'm sure Varys can help glean what the Braavosi truly want from us. He rose, signaling an end to the conversation. Arrange a letter to the Iron Bank. I'll draft it and sign by tomorrow. We'll proceed carefully. Connington nodded and left, leaving Rhaegar alone in the solar. The coals in the hearth glowed orange, shadows flickering on the walls. Rhaegar stared into the flames, recalling the days when prophecies and riddles consumed his youth. He had once believed so strongly in the prince that was promised, in the notion that the Targaryen line held some sacred destiny to defend the realm against a great darkness. Perhaps that was still true. But over the years, he'd come to see that day-to-day governance mattered more than prophecy. People needed bread, justice, and hope. If a nightmare threat ever arose from the far north, only a united realm could stand against it. In a sense, all his efforts at conciliation, all of his leaps toward stability, were forging a bulwark for a future he still half feared. He thought, too, of Lyanna Stark. In quiet moments, her memory still pierced him with regret and longing. She had died so young. The world believed many different stories. Some said she perished in childbirth, others that she was ill or wounded. He had never publicly acknowledged that she bore him a child, nor had Ned Stark. If that child had survived, the realm would have known of it. Instead, Ned had returned from the rebellion with a bastard he named Jon Snow. So the rumors whispered, but none could say for certain. The North, stoic and private, guarded its secrets well. Eddard Stark never spoke of that matter, and Rhaegar chose not to press. Still, in the silent moments of the night, the thought haunted him. If Lyanna's child yet lived, how different might the future be? Was that child part of the prophecy, or was it only the illusions of a younger man chasing a half-remembered verse? He shook off the thought. He was a king, father to Aegon and Rhaenys, blessed with a wife who had shown him unwavering support. Dwelling on the past would serve no one. That evening, a hush fell over King's Landing as the dusk deepened. Light snowfall dusted rooftops, and the wind carried a faint chill of brine from the Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar joined his family for supper in a modest dining hall of the Red Keep. Princess Elia Martell waited at the table with their daughter, Rhaenys. Elia, her dark hair shot through with a few silver strands, still possessed the regal bearing of Dorne's bloodline. Though never robust in health, she carried herself with quiet dignity, a gentle warmth in her eyes. Rhaenys, now 19, sat tall. She wore a gown gold silk that brought out her warm complexion. Though a Targaryen princess, she was also proud of her Dornish roots. She often wore the sun and spear sigil, discreetly embroidered somewhere on her garments. Aegon arrived shortly after Rhaegar. The four of them dined in relative privacy, a simple meal of roasted duck, turnips, and spiced wine. Servants bowed in and out, bearing fresh courses. Rhaenys asked about the day's council session. Aegon listened, enthralled, to talk of Ironborn trouble and the renewed need for ships. Elia commented gently that Dorne's ports might help build new vessels if the crown needed them. Rhaegar thanked her for the offer, but made no decisions. His mind was on the north. The letter from Eddard Stark. Midway through supper, a page entered, bowing deeply. "Pardon, your graces. There is a messenger from Winterfell. Lord Stark requests an immediate audience with his grace in the Solar. He says the matter is urgent." Rhaegar exchanged a glance with Elia. She pressed her lips in concern. "Invite Lord Stark in, of course," Rhaegar said. He cast a regretful look at the partially eaten meal. "We'll continue dinner later if time allows." Elia smiled softly. "Attend to your duties. We'll keep supper warm for you." Rhaegar left the table and walked briskly to the Solar, Aegon at his side. When they entered, Eddard Stark stood near the fireplace, warming his hands against the cold. He wore the heavy furs of the north, his face lined with a quiet tension. Beside him was a younger man of the Night's Watch, wearing black leather and wool, his breath misting in the air each time he exhaled. Another man, older, white-haired, also in black, waited near the wall, clearly an officer. Rhaegar inclined his head. "Lord Stark, you arrived sooner than I expected. I trust the roads were passable." Eddard bowed. "Barely, but the matter demanded haste, your grace." He turned to gesture at the men in black. "This is Lord Commander Mormont of the Night's Watch, and this young man is one of his stewards, tasked with delivering vital news." The older man, Jorah Mormont, a bear of a figure even in his age, offered a deep nod. "Your Grace, we come on behalf of the Watch, with grave tidings from beyond the wall." Rhaegar saw the seriousness in both men's eyes. Even Ned Stark, seldom one to show fear openly, seemed grim. "Please, be seated," Rhaegar said, motioning them toward chairs. The men hesitated, Protocol demanded they wait for the king to sit. So Rhaegar sat first, and only then did they take chairs. Aegon positioned himself near Rhaegar's shoulder, listening intently. Mormont spoke, voice gravelly. "I won't mince words, Your Grace. We have reports from rangers in the far north. They've encountered the dead, walking corpses with blue eyes, impervious to normal steel. One patrol vanished entirely. Another found only bodies, scattered as though torn by unnatural strength. My men believe these are no mere wildlings, but creatures from the old tales, White Walkers, the others. It's madness, but we've seen enough to fear it's real." "Sir." A hush fell. Ned Stark added, "I've seen signs as well, though not so directly. In Winterfell, we've had refugees from the Gift and the Eastern Hills, telling stories of whites and pale spiders. I'd not have believed it myself, had I not known you, Rhaegar, to be open to such possibilities. So I bring this to you now, in person, to beg your help. The Watch is sorely undermanned. If the threat is what it seems, it must be addressed." Danar, the younger steward in black, who looked to be perhaps 15 or 16, swallowed hard. "My Lord Father." He caught himself, glancing from Ned to Rhaegar. "I mean, Lord Stark and the Lord Commander asked me to add any details I witnessed. I was part of a group that found a wildling village with no survivors. We saw footprints in the snow, large inhuman shapes, and the corpses wouldn't burn easily. They seemed frozen, almost solid." Rhaegar folded his hands. "What is your name, lad?" G. Samuel, the steward answered quickly, though he seemed flustered. "Samuel Rivers, Your Grace." At that, Ned shot the young man a quick, inscrutable glance, as if to caution him. But Rhaegar noticed it only briefly, attributing it to the usual northern custom regarding bastardy and naming. Jor Mormont cleared his throat. "We need men, Your Grace. We need weapons. The Watch is fewer than 1,000 strong. If the legends of the others prove true, if they are massing for an incursion, we stand no chance alone. The realms of men must unite as they did in the Age of Heroes." Nanund. Rhaegar felt a thrill of cold fear under his ribs. The old stories. The reason he had once believed so passionately in prophecy. Could it be that a new long night was stirring beyond the wall? "You've come to me at risk, riding in winter roads," he said quietly. "I will not dismiss you. But are you certain these sightings cannot be explained by whites or some cunning trick of wildlings?" Mormont's eyes grew fierce. "I am certain normal wildlings do not walk after death with eyes of ice, nor do they shrug off sword blows as if they were nothing. My men say they had to burn the bodies to kill them. Fire and dragonglass. Thy old lore. We're short on both." Ned Stark exhaled slowly. "I trust the Lord Commander, Rhaegar. If he says the threat is real, I believe him." He paused, glancing at Samuel. The young man looked pale, as though recounting horrors that still plagued his dreams. "I rode here to ask for your aid in sending men and supplies to the wall. The lords of the north can only do so much. We need the entire realm's help. And if you do not believe us, then at least send your own men to investigate. But do not turn a blind eye." Rhaegar's mind churned. War with the dead. Myth come to life. Could it truly be so? If it was, all the petty troubles of reaving Ironborn or restructured tariffs paled in comparison. The great enemy. The realm's ancient terror. He remembered the half-buried lines of prophecy from texts in the Red Keep's library. "When the cold winds blow and the snows of the long night fall, the dead shall rise and kings shall fall." He had read them in secret, half dismissing them as fables. Yet here was a knight of the Watch speaking of dead men that walked. The words of the rangers echoed a grim chord in his heart. He stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the courtyard lay hushed. "You ask for men. Very well. I pledged once to bolster the Watch. I will do so. But this is more than a question of manpower. We must unify the great houses. If the realm is threatened by an enemy that does not fear cold or steel, we cannot rely on half measures." "No." He turned, meeting Mormont's eyes. "Lord Commander, I will command each region to send able-bodied recruits to join you. Supplies, grain, weapons, warm clothing will be shipped up the White Knife to Castle Black. But that alone may not be enough. You spoke of dragonglass. That is obsidian, yes? There are deposits on Dragonstone, if I recall correctly. Mormont nodded quickly. So, the tales say. We have a small store, but not nearly enough to arm thousands. Oh, no. Rhaegar's mind raced. Then we'll begin shipping obsidian from Dragonstone to the Wall. I'll see that it's done. Fire, too, is said to harm these creatures. Did you mention that the bodies were best destroyed by flame? Mormont rumbled. Then we shall equip the watch with flammable oils if necessary, Rhaegar said. But more than that, we may need alliances we haven't considered. The wildlings themselves. Some might choose to stand with us if they understand the threat. I recall rumors that certain wildling leaders tried to bring their people south to flee the others. He paused, remembering the war stories of earlier decades. It's possible we need to speak with them too. That's a thorny matter, for they are outlaws in the eyes of the realm. But if an army of the dead truly threatens us, we cannot ignore any path to cooperation. Ned Stark listened, relief mingling with worry in his eyes. I never thought I'd see the day we treat with wildlings, but if it spares us from destruction, I'll do my part. Rhaegar exhaled, feeling the enormity of it all settle on his shoulders. His father's madness had nearly destroyed King's Landing. Robert's rebellion had torn the realm apart. Now, a decade of careful rebuilding might be tested by a foe beyond imagination. Very well, he said softly. Lord Commander Mormont, you have the word of the king. The watch shall not stand alone. Remain in King's Landing a short while. I will call an emergency session of the council, and we will draft a royal decree. When you return to the north, you shall take with you letters bearing my seal, commanding the lords to send you men and supplies. Also, we shall begin shipping obsidian from Dragonstone. In time, I might even travel north myself to see the situation. Let us pray it doesn't come to open war. Naw. Mormont's leathery face showed a flicker of gratitude. Thank you, Your Grace. The watch will remember your aid. Ned Stark nodded as well. You have my thanks. The North stands with the crown in this, as it should. Knew me. Rhaegar offered a small, sober smile. We stand together, or we fall alone. In his mind, an echo from his youth stirred. The realm needs a champion when the darkness falls. He had always believed that champion might be himself, or perhaps one of his children. He wondered now if the champion would be them all, united. There was no single hero who could hold back the night. Only a realm that believed in the value of uniting its strengths. He gestured for them to retire and rest, promising to call on them first thing in the morning. Aegon, silent for much of the exchange, escorted them out, making sure servants showed them to suitable rooms. When Aegon returned, his voice trembled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Father, if the White Walkers are real, then everything you told me as a child about the long night. It's not just stories. You truly believe it might happen again? Rhaegar's throat felt tight. He placed a hand on Aegon's shoulder. I don't know. But if the Lord Commander has seen these creatures, we can't pretend they don't exist. We must prepare, because the cost of disbelief may be too high. But do not despair. Together, the realm is strong. This just one. Aegon nodded slowly, determination flickering in his violet eyes. I'll do whatever is needed. Rhaegar watched him depart, feeling pride tempered by fear. He remembered the rubies on his old armor, the day he slew Robert Baratheon at the Trident. That day had decided the fate of the Targaryen dynasty for a generation. But was that mere prelude to a greater test? The war for the Dawn, the ancient struggle with the others, might loom on the horizon. The steps he took now would either forge a shield for Westeros or condemn it. With a final glance at the darkened window, he steeled himself. If he had to face an enemy beyond mortal ken, then so be it. He was Rhaegar of House Targaryen, king of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, protector of the realm. The realm was worth protecting, at any cost. He returned to his family, finishing the supper with a thoughtful silence that weighed on them all. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing thrummed with news of the king's new decree. Ravens flew to every corner of the 7 kingdoms. They carried orders. Each region must send men to reinforce the night's watch. Each must prepare supply trains of grain, fodder, and warm clothing for the winter road. Some lords complied readily, those who trusted Rhaegar's judgment or had close ties to Eddard Stark. Others balked at the expense or scoffed at the notion of a threat from beyond the wall. Whispers circulated in taverns. Has the king grown gullible, believing in monsters like an old grandmother? A decade of peace had lulled them into thinking no great peril could arise that far north. Even within the small council, there was some skepticism. Lord Tyrell's envoy suggested a smaller contribution, citing the distance of the reach from the wall. Representatives from the Westerlands grumbled about the taxes needed to ship large quantities of grain so far north. The Iron Islanders complained that they should be exempt from such burdens, for their lords had no interest in the far north. Still, Rhaegar pressed on, meeting resistance with patience, reminding them that if the threat was real, all would suffer in the end. He summoned the High Septon to speak before the city, urging the faithful to support the king's orders. This helped sway many devout small folk, though it did little to move certain high lords who only cared for coin. Nonetheless, the shipments began. Donkey trains of salted fish, casks of flour, and bundles of hides for winter cloaks started making their way up the King's Road. Rhaegar oversaw the forging of thousands of arrowheads from obsidian quarried on Dragonstone. Ships laden with crates of the black glass sailed from Blackwater Bay around Westeros to White Harbor. The cost was staggering, and the crown's treasury dwindled. But each time the Master of Coin fretted, Rhaegar responded with calm conviction. We are fortifying a shield for our entire realm. That is worth the gold. Meanwhile, Lord Commander Mormont lingered in King's Landing, meeting with blacksmiths, overseeing the loading of wagons, ensuring that all would be properly allocated to Castle Black. Eddard Stark soon departed, stating that his place was in the north. He had no desire to remain in the capital longer than necessary. His departure was quiet, overshadowed by the flurry of activity. But before he left, he and Rhaegar had a final conversation in the Red Keep's courtyard. They walked side by side along the parapets, accompanied only by the brisk wind and the swirl of a few snowflakes. Ned wore a thick cloak of wolf fur, while Rhaegar stuck to his more modest black cloak, letting the chill remind him of the North's plight. They came to a stop near a brazier, its coals glowing dully. Ned's voice was low. You do me honor, Rhaegar, by heeding our warning so swiftly. Many kings would have dismissed the night's watch as superstitious. I don't forget that you spared my life years ago when all was chaos. It seems I owe you again. Shamed. Rhaegar shook his head. I do only what I must. Our personal histories aside, the realm must be protected. You know, Ned, I remember your father's fate, how the Mad King burned him. I only hope the good we do now can somehow atone for the sins of House Targaryen's darker days. A flicker of pain crossed Ned's features. We've all lost family to war and cruelty. If we can prevent more death, that would be atonement enough. He paused, pulling something from his cloak, a small parcel wrapped in leather. Take this, if you will. It's a token of trust. Rhaegar accepted the bundle, opening it curiously. Inside lay a sheaf of old papers, genealogies, a few letters, and at the bottom, what looked like an old piece of cloth embroidered with a direwolf and a dragon entwined. Rhaegar frowned, unsure of its significance. Ned looked away, as though gathering his nerve. When Robert died on the Trident, it ended the war. But some consequences outlived that day. I won't speak of them now. But if we face a threat greater than any living man has seen, perhaps old enmities and secrets must fade. If the time ever comes that you question your lineage, or the lineage of those you hold dear, remember that I gave you these. His voice trembled subtly. For now, they may mean nothing. But in the darkest hour, they may mean everything. It was the oddest gift, and Rhaegar, uncertain how to respond, simply said, Thank you, Ned. He sensed a profound undertone, as if Ned alluded to a secret so great it might shatter the realm's assumptions. Yet Rhaegar had learned not to press Ned Stark for answers. he was not ready to give. Instead, he tucked the parcel away carefully. "I'll keep it safe. Travel well, my friend." Ned placed a hand briefly on Rhaegar's shoulder. "Take care of the realm, King Rhaegar." Then he left, furs rustling behind him as he descended the stone steps. The sound of horses and men in the courtyard soon told Rhaegar that the Lord of Winterfell was gone. A few days later, Lord Commander Mormont likewise departed with a caravan of wagons, loaded to the brim with provisions for the night's watch. Rhaegar stood atop the castle walls as they rumbled out of the city gates, black banners snapping in the wind. The watchers in the streets gave the column curious stares. Some small folk doffed their caps in respect, for the story had spread that the king was helping the men in black face a mysterious northern menace. Others muttered that it was a waste of coin. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, praying that the men traveling north might not be riding to their doom. When the last wagon disappeared from view, Rhaegar turned to find Prince Aegon at his elbow. "I want to help," his son said quietly. "If the Watch truly faces an army of the dead, sending provisions may not be enough." Rhaegar placed a hand on his shoulder. "All in good time. For now, strengthening them and forging alliances is the best we can do. Ruling means prioritizing. We still have to keep the realm stable, or the Night's Watch will never get the support they need. If I rode north personally, half the lords might panic, thinking we're on the verge of an apocalypse." Aegon nodded, though a glimmer of restlessness shone in his eyes. "I understand. But one day, if the threat becomes undeniable, let me go. I've trained in swordplay, studied the history of the others. I want to protect the realm, as you have." Pride and protectiveness mingled in Rhaegar's heart. "When the day comes, if the realm calls, we will answer together. I promise." The winter deepened, yet King's Landing carried on with its daily life. The harbor remained busy, and the local markets bustled with trade from the narrow sea. The king's decrees for the wall had overshadowed most other politics, but the standard routine resumed: sessions of the small council, disputes to settle, new lords to confirm, trade negotiations with Bravos. Rhaegar found himself in countless meetings, sending out more ravens to quell concerns about the northern shipments. Some lords demanded reassurances that this was not a ruse to impose new taxes for the king's personal gain. Others simply wanted to ensure their own region's needs were not forgotten. The pageantry of the monarchy remained as well, with visiting envoys from across the sea, occasionally presenting exotic gifts or petitions for trade privileges. One day, months into this slow winter, a letter arrived from the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy wrote in curt language that he would comply with the king's command to send recruits to the Night's Watch, but only criminals or thralls who had earned their condemnation. He refused to pay for shipping them, stating that if King Rhaegar wanted them, the crown could send ships to collect them. "The Ironborn will not feed the crows," his final line read. A lesser king might have found the wording offensive enough to rouse fury, but Rhaegar only sighed. This was the way of the Iron Islands. He arranged to dispatch a handful of ships to pick up Greyjoy's promised recruits, though the thought of forcibly manning the Night's Watch with thralls and criminals left a sour taste. Better that than no men at all, he reasoned. He did not forget the subtle tensions that might erupt with Tywin Lannister either. Though Tywin officially supported the crown's directives, rumors reached Rhaegar that Lannister gold was being used strategically to undercut some of the crown's new trade regulations to maintain the West's autonomy. Rhaegar found no direct evidence of treason, but Tywin was a cunning man, always seeking advantage. In a private conversation with Jon Connington, Rhaegar admitted that should a day come when the realm was distracted by a northern threat, House Lannister might seek greater power for itself. Connington recommended caution, keep a watchful eye on the Westerlands. But war with the West was the last thing Rhaegar wanted. He resolved to handle Tywin as he had for a decade, with patience, courtesy, and unyielding resolve on matters that truly affected the realm's well-being. Meanwhile, the younger generation of lords and ladies flourished at court. Rhaenys, witty and graceful, was courted by several high-born suitors, though she showed little inclination to wed quickly. Aegon prepared for his journey to Dorne, practicing his High Valyrian and the common tongue of the free cities as well. He also trained with the sword, spear, and even a Dornish curved blade, under the tutelage of experienced weapons masters. Rhaegar took time whenever possible to spar with his son, though he found Aegon already quite adept and agile. He watched with pride as Aegon blocked, parried, and struck, each motion fluid with a careful edge of caution that might serve him well in any future conflict. A few days before Aegon's planned departure for Sunspear, Rhaenys walked with her father in the Red Keep's garden, an enclosed space warmed somewhat by braziers. The rose bushes had withered for the winter, but the evergreen shrubs still formed a winding maze. Rhaenys wore a heavy cloak over her gown, her breath misting as she spoke. "Father, do you really believe these tales of whites and white walkers? It frightens me to think of dead men walking. But you always taught us not to scoff at old stories." He paused by a bare-limbed tree, its bark dusted with frost. "I believe something stirs in the north, yes. The Lord Commander's sincerity is beyond doubt. Whether it's as large-scale an invasion as the legends say, we can't be certain. But it's best we prepare." "Then," she gazed at him, eyes full of both curiosity and concern. "Will Aegon be safe traveling south when a threat looms in the north?" Rhaegar smiled gently. "Dorne is stable, and it's important to keep alliances strong. The threat in the north won't vanish overnight, but it also won't be resolved quickly. I suspect we have time before any cataclysm. If real war comes, I'll summon every corner of the realm to unite. Aegon can return quickly by ship if needed. For now, we must do what kings and princes do: maintain the realm, keep the lords loyal, and ensure no single region is neglected." "Never." Rhaenys brushed a hand along a brittle branch, eyes distant. "I sometimes envy you, father, for the certainty you project. How do you bear it, balancing the entire realm's troubles on your shoulders?" He exhaled a gentle laugh. "I don't always feel certain. Often, I rely on counsel and hope I make the right choices. It's less about being sure and more about refusing to let fear paralyze you." He touched her cheek lightly. "You're strong, Rhaenys, and wise. I see so much of your mother in you, and some of Lyanna's spirit as well." The words slipped out unthinking, a rare mention of the Stark woman who had shaped his past. He paused, seeing a flicker of curiosity in Rhaenys's eyes. But she only nodded, a subtle question lingering there. She had grown up knowing that her father's past was complicated, yet she respected the mother who raised her, Elia Martell, and did not pry too deeply into old scars. They walked on, discussing the possibility that Rhaenys might one day visit Dorne again. She teased that perhaps she'd find a suitor there, though she showed no rush to wed. When they parted, Rhaegar felt a weight in his heart. His children were blossoming, each forging their own path. He wanted them to know only peace. But the realm's undercurrents whispered of new storms, whether from northern nightmares or from the unscrupulous ambitions of certain lords. At last, the day came for Aegon's departure to Dorne. A royal galley awaited him at the docks, bright pennants snapping in a cold breeze. The crew had stocked provisions enough for the short voyage along the coast. Elia and Rhaenys accompanied him to the docks, each exchanging parting embraces. Rhaegar stood with them, giving Aegon a final fatherly embrace. "Be mindful of your safety. Dorne can be harsh if you offend the wrong lords, but Uncle Doran will guide you. And the Martells are family. Learn well from them." Aegon nodded gravely. "I'll write often, and if anything changes in the north, send word, and I'll return at once." Rhaegar clapped him on the shoulder. "Go with the blessings of the Seven, and the old gods too, for good measure. We'll see each other soon enough." Then a crowd had gathered to watch the prince depart. The small folk cheered and waved as Aegon boarded the galley, his retinue behind him, young squires, a few knights, and some attendants. As the gangplank was raised, Rhaegar felt a pang of fatherly concern, mingled with pride. The sails unfurled, bearing the three-headed dragon of Targaryen black and red. With a final salute, the ship glided away from the dock, turning southward along the coast. The winter sun glinted off the waves, and soon the vessel was just another shape on the horizon. Elia sighed softly, tugging her cloak closer. "Our boy is growing up. Soon enough, Rhaenys too will spread her wings." Rhaegar took her arm in his, leaning close. "We raised them well," he murmured, though privately, his thoughts drifted to the shadows on the horizon. If a new long night was indeed coming, how many families would be torn apart? He hoped the day would never come when Aegon or Rhaenys had to test themselves in war. But he had also prepared them for that possibility. A Targaryen king must protect his kingdom. A Targaryen heir must be ready to do the same. Returning to the Red Keep, Rhaegar found new tasks awaiting him. The Master of Coin had urgent requests for more gold from the Royal Mint to fund the Night's Watch shipping. Tywin Lannister had sent a coolly polite letter questioning the crown's finances. Balon Greyjoy had replied with another cryptic message about paying the iron price for any men the crown took from the Iron Islands. Amid these letters sat one from Mace Tyrell, praising the king's wisdom but subtly pressing for a marriage alliance for Rhaenys. Rhaegar read each, setting aside those that required immediate response. It was endless, but so it went for a king. Time marched on. Slowly, the shipments to the north expanded. Reports trickled back from Castle Black that the new recruits were inadequate in training, but at least they bolstered the numbers. Caravans of obsidian arrowheads and newly forged spears arrived at the wall, stored in black cellars amid the swirling snows. Wildling raids increased somewhat, but it seemed more out of desperation than cunning. Mormont's letters spoke of attempted talks with a few wildling chieftains. Nothing conclusive yet. Amid these concerns, word arrived from Dorne that Aegon had reached Sunspear safely. Doran Martell welcomed him with full honors. Aegon wrote that the sun-baked walls and the spiced Dornish wines astonished him. The dryness of the air, the bright oranges and lemons in the courtyards, it was a world away from the stony corridors of King's Landing. He planned to tour the region, meeting lesser lords and forging friendships. Rhaegar felt a measure of relief that at least in Dorne, his son was safe from winter's gloom. A few months later, at the twilight's edge of the year, a flicker of trouble arose in the Stormlands. Reports reached the Red Keep that certain lords along the Marcher borders had refused to send more grain north, claiming their own harvest had been meager. They also complained that with Aegon absent, they had less incentive to comply, since some had hoped to catch the young prince's favor. Rhaegar dispatched a royal envoy, reminding them of their duties. He debated traveling there personally, but the roads had grown icy, and matters in King's Landing demanded his presence. Still, the cracks in the realm's compliance were beginning to show. Not every corner of Westeros shared his conviction about the northern threat. In the midst of these frustrations, Rhaegar found solace in the quiet hours of the evening, often retreating to a small chamber where he kept an old silver harp. Though he rarely performed publicly now, playing soothed his nerves. On one such evening he remembered the battered leather bundle Ned Stark had given him months ago. He retrieved it from a locked chest and opened it under the lamplight. The genealogies were archaic, referencing Starks and Targaryens from centuries past. The letters were written in a formal hand, though time had faded the ink. He puzzled over them, scanning references to a hidden branch and lines about the union of ice and fire. At the bottom, that embroidered cloth with a direwolf and dragon entwined seemed to hint at a secret alliance. Something about it tugged at his memory. He recalled the heartbreak in Ned Stark's eyes when he'd spoken of secrets best kept hidden. Rhaegar's gaze fell on a snippet of a letter that read, "He shall be the song of ice and fire." Had Rhaegar himself not once believed that child would be Aegon? Or had it been someone else? An ache formed in his chest. If there had been a child of his and Lyanna's, living in the north unknown, but that was all rumor. Was Ned implying that? Or was this some ancient text from the days of King Jaehaerys? He set the bundle aside, no closer to an answer. Perhaps Ned had entrusted it to him in case the realm needed that knowledge one day. Rhaegar suspected it might tie to the prophecy of Azor Ahai reborn, or the prince that was promised. Yet he had learned to temper prophecy with practicality. Dreams alone would not fend off an army of the dead. Steel, alliances, and unit. Those were his weapons now. Winter continued its slow crawl, and the city adapted. Ice sometimes rhymed the edges of the Blackwater River. Street peddlers sold mulled wine and hot bread to keep out the chill. Royal hunts were fewer, as game in the king's wood grew sparser. Rhaegar spent more time indoors, issuing edicts, meeting with petitioners. His queen, Elia, managed charitable relief for the poor, distributing blankets and firewood. She also oversaw an expanded hospital presence with the faith's healers. Many small folk spoke of her kindness. In those difficult months, Rhaegar saw more clearly than ever how Elia's grace and empathy anchored his rule. In late evening hours, sometimes he looked out from the battlements toward the north. He wondered what was happening at the wall. Reports were infrequent, the roads hazardous. The few ravens that came spoke of bitter cold, drifting snows, and sightings of strange lights in the sky at night. Auroras, or so the watchers said. The living shadows, they called them, painting the black sky with ghostly colors. No more direct mention of White Walkers had surfaced, but tension thrummed beneath the lines of every letter. The men at Castle Black waited, vigilant. Then one dawn, a new raven arrived from Jor Mormont. It was brief, the words scratched in a hurried hand. Your Grace, more whites encountered at the night fort. We lost 4 men. 1 walker sighted, killed by fire and dragonglass spear. This is real. We will do our duty, but the threat grows. Send more men if you can. Mormont. As you know. Rhaegar closed his eyes after reading. A chill settled over him, deeper than the winter air. He heard the faint rustle of paper as he folded the message. At last, the others were not mere rumor or possibility. Mormont had confirmed an actual encounter, with casualties. They had killed one, proving it could be done, but at a cost of 4 men. If the threat continued to mount, how soon before dozens, then hundreds rose from the dead? He summoned the small council at once, letting them read Mormont's letter. Tension flared around the table. John Connington's face darkened, and he spoke of mobilizing a royal army. Varys pursed his lips, cautioning that if the realm perceived a full-scale mobilization, panic might ensue, and that Tywin Lannister, for one, might exploit the crown's focus on the north. Maester Arwen repeated that the Citadel's older records did mention the others as unstoppable in large numbers. Once they began to move in force, entire villages could be wiped out. The only feasible solution was a united front. Rhaegar listened, balancing all. Then he spoke. We have no choice but to prepare for a worst-case scenario. Let us call the banners, not for an invasion or conquest, but for a grand muster near Winterfell, an alliance of the realms. We will present it as a show of unity, an exercise to demonstrate our readiness for winter's dangers. If men balk, we can invoke the memory of the long night as more than a story. Eddard Stark will stand with us, and the men of the North will... They debated well into the day. In the end, they decided. The Crown would issue a call for able-bodied men from each house to gather at Winterfell in the new year, under the King's command, for joint winter maneuvers, with the Night's Watch participating. Officially, it would be spun as a chance for lords to see the North's conditions firsthand. Unofficially, Rhaegar hoped to position a fighting force that could move quickly to the wall if the others launched a larger incursion. The realm's reaction was mixed. Many lords were shocked. They'd never heard of a king calling the banners for a practice assembly in the dead of winter. But Rhaegar's word carried weight, and his record of fairness had earned him respect. Some jumped at the chance to prove their loyalty and gain favor. Others grumbled about the cost. Over the next few weeks, the roads north began to fill with marching columns of men, knights and foot soldiers, supply wagons and camp followers. It was no small feat to move an army in winter. They traveled in smaller detachments to avoid draining local resources, all planning to converge near Winterfell at the designated date. Everyone wondered what the king intended, but they complied. Rhaegar prepared to journey north himself, leaving the governance of King's Landing to a trusted regent, Sir Barristan Selmy. Along with a committee including the Master of Coin and the City Watch commander, would handle day-to-day matters. Elia Martell chose to remain in the capital, her health somewhat frail in winter. Rhaenys insisted on accompanying her father. At first, Rhaegar hesitated, worried for her safety in the harsh climate, but she argued that as a princess, she should see the realm's perils for herself. She was no longer a child, and if her younger brother could journey to Dorne, she ought to be able to stand in the cold north. In the end, Rhaegar relented, on the condition she travel with a sufficient guard and warm furs. She laughed, saying she'd rather wear wolf pelts than freeze. The day they set out, a bright winter sun shone on the Red Keep's courtyard, where 100 mounted knights assembled. Rhaegar rode at the head, cloaked in black fur lined with crimson. Rhaenys rode at his side, wearing a heavy cloak embroidered with subtle Dornish suns. Sir Jaime Lannister and Sir Barristan Selmy, as Kingsguard, accompanied them until the city gate, at which point Selmy remained behind to handle regency matters. Jaime continued on, sworn to protect the king. Also joining the retinue were Sir Arthur Dayne's nephew, who had come to court recently, and a handful of lords who wanted to be seen at the king's side. Lord Royce of the Vale, Lord Mouton of Maidenpool, and a few others. The roads beyond the city teemed with travelers heading north, some wearing the sigils of Storm's End, some from the Reach, others from lesser houses. Wagons rumbled, carrying grain and supplies. As they traveled, Rhaegar saw the marks of winter everywhere. Fields lay fallow under a blanket of frost, streams froze at the edges, and the nights were bitterly cold. Yet people along the King's Road came out to watch them pass, to wave or kneel in the snow. Some asked for blessings, others for a bit of coin. Rhaenys distributed bread from a store wagon, and the small folk offered their thanks. Many had not seen a king in person for decades, if ever, and Rhaegar hoped they took some measure of comfort from his presence. The march was arduous. Beyond the Trident, the cold intensified. They paused at Harrenhal, its great black towers looming as a testament to ambition gone awry. Lord Went offered them a place to rest. A portion of the army camped outside the castle walls, while Rhaegar and Rhaenys slept within. They departed the next morning, pressing on. Snow flurries became a regular occurrence, whipping through the fields. Men bundled in cloaks and furs, complaining that winter had truly come. Near Moat Cailin, they found Eddard Stark waiting with a contingent of Northmen. A few thousand strong, they stood along the causeway, banners snapping in the biting wind, grey direwolves on white fields. Ned greeted Rhaegar with a solemn bow, then clasped his arm in a gesture of respect. "Your Grace, Winterfell is prepared for you and your men. We've expanded our winter stores as best we can." Rhaegar thanked him. "I bring more supplies in the train behind us, and many lords from other regions. We will need your guidance on how best to manage them in the cold." Ned nodded. "We'll manage. Better that they see the north for themselves so they believe the threat. Many still dismiss it as old wives' tales." They traveled on together. With Ned's men reinforcing the columns, the final leg of the journey went more smoothly, though the cold was sharper than ever. One dawn, as they approached the outskirts of Winterfell, Rhaegar and Rhaenys stood on a small ridge, gazing at the ancient fortress. Smoke rose from the chimneys, evidence of its hot springs that warmed the halls. The massive walls of grey stone had stood for millennia, a silent guardian. Rhaenys breathed a foggy breath, eyes wide. "It's bigger than I remembered." Rhaegar recalled the place from his earlier visits, but each time it impressed him anew. The history here was tangible in the stones. It felt like they were stepping back into the Age of Heroes. Perhaps it was fitting that this fortress would serve as the mustering point for a threat out of legend. Inside Winterfell's courtyard, the scene bustled with commotion. Tents were pitched in the outer bailey to house the southern soldiers. Knights stomped their feet and breathed into their cupped hands, trying to stave off numbness. Stark bannermen directed the newcomers to stables and barracks. Servants hauled barrels of salted meat and casks of ale. The constant churn of wagons threatened to turn the snow to slush, then to mud. Rhaegar dismounted, helping Rhaenys down, and Ned guided them through the great stone gates. The warmth inside was not as strong as King's Landing, but it was better than the biting wind outside. Ned's lady, Catelyn Stark, Onsa Tully, greeted them with courtesy. She wore a thick cloak of blue, pinned with a silver trout. Behind her stood her children, Robb, a boy of about 10, solemn but curious; Sansa, younger, with bright auburn hair and wide eyes; Arya, a restless girl who peered out from behind her mother's skirts; Bran, a toddler clinging to Catelyn's hand, and the babe Rickon not yet walking. Rhaegar noticed, too, a dark-haired boy off to the side. Quiet, watchful. He stood a bit apart from the others, wearing plain garb, though he looked about the same age as Robb. That must be Ned's bastard, Jon Snow. Rhaegar had heard the name whispered. The boy's eyes flicked to Rhaegar, then away. Something about that furtive glance made Rhaegar's heart skip a beat. Perhaps he imagined a similarity in the boy's features to Lyanna's. But the moment passed, lost as the family bowed. Rhaegar nodded graciously. "My lady, thank you for hosting us. We bring many men and burdens upon your home. I vow to keep the peace and see that they respect your hospitality." Lady Catelyn smiled with measured politeness. "Winterfell is yours, your grace. Our stores are open, though we might not match the fare of King's Landing." "Danaway. We aren't here for feasting, but for unity," Rhaegar said gently. "We'll manage with simple fare. Let's see the Great Hall, so we may plan our next steps." Ned led them inside, away from the swirl of snow. The castle's interior was warmer, thanks to the hot springs. Steam rose faintly from vents in the stone floors in some corridors, and the walls felt alive with history. They convened in the Great Hall, where a large fire blazed in the hearth, washing the room in orange light. Banners of House Stark hung overhead. In short order, the higher lords among the southern arrivals came to attend. The hall filled with the jangle of mail, the shuffle of boots, and the murmur of conversation. Men from the Reach, the Riverlands, the Vale, the Crownlands, and even a small group from the Westerlands. No Lannister in direct attendance. Tywin had not come, but he sent a cousin to represent him. When they were assembled, Rhaegar climbed a short dais near the head of the hall. Ned stood at his side, his posture stiff but supportive. Rhaenys found a seat nearby, flanked by Northerners who gazed at her with curiosity. This half-Dornish, half-Targaryen princess so far from home. Snow trickled in through small windows high above, swirling in the flickering torchlight. Rhaegar spoke, his voice carrying clearly. "My lords and knights, I have called you here not for conquest, but for the defense of our realm. You have all heard the rumors, nightmares from beyond the wall, the dead walking, ancient evils. Some doubt these stories, but Lord Commander Mormont of the Night's Watch has seen them, and lost men to them. The North has faced attacks by whites. We cannot stand idle. You are gathered at Winterfell to bear witness, to train together, and should it prove necessary, to march north. The Great Night's Watch stands as our first bulwark, but it is thinly manned. If the threat grows, we must be ready to defend the living against the dead." "Now answers me." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some faces showed skepticism, others dread. "I do not ask you to abandon your lands indefinitely. But, for now, we form a united host under Winterfell's leadership. We shall send scouting parties to the wall, gather first-hand reports, and act accordingly. If any man here doubts the severity, I invite you to speak with the Rangers themselves. When you have seen, you will doubt no more." Then Sebastian. A hush. Then a lord of the Vale ventured a polite query. "Your Grace, do we know the scale of this threat? Are we to expect a few scattered incidents, or a legion of the dead?" Rhaegar shook his head. "We do not know. That is why we must prepare for the worst. Better to be over-prepared than undone by disbelief." He gestured to Ned. "Lord Stark, do you have words for your guests?" Ned stepped forward, face somber. "Winterfell welcomes you all. We will share what we have. Know that I do not exaggerate the danger. This is not the first time I have heard of White Walkers. The free folk beyond the wall have been fleeing south, seeking refuge. Many die trying. They fear an advancing shadow. We must remain vigilant. If any among you thinks this is a trick or a wasted journey, I beg you to keep an open mind. My father and brother died by Targaryen madness once, but I stand here today telling you, King Rhaegar has saved the realm from that madness, and he stands ready to protect us. I do not say this lightly. Let us put old grudges aside. Nen, is you mad?" His words rang with sincerity. Men murmured among themselves, some looking persuaded, others uncertain. But none openly challenged the king's directive, for Rhaegar had built enough respect that none wished to appear a coward or a fool. So it was decided. They would remain at Winterfell, sending rotating patrols up to the wall, training in the courtyard, forging new weapons from the obsidian stock. The watchers on the walls of Winterfell would keep an eye for any sign of trouble from the northern roads. Each day, more small bands of southern soldiers arrived, swelling the throng in and around the castle. Fires burned day and night, the smiths hammered out arrowheads, and the lords quarreled over the best way to counter an enemy most had never seen. In the midst of this martial bustle, Rhaegar found the courtyard swirling with diverse heraldry. Flowers, lions, falcons, trouts, stags. The Targaryen banners flew beside the direwolf of Stark. Despite the cold, he felt a stirring in his heart. The realm, once sundered by rebellion, now gathered in common cause. This was what he had always hoped for: unity to face a greater foe. If only it had come under brighter circumstances. Weeks passed and winter deepened further. Scouts returned from the wall with conflicting reports. Some saw no sign of the others. Others found footprints in the snow that vanished abruptly, as if the creatures themselves had flown or dissolved into the wind. Occasionally, a body turned up in the wilderness, pale, with blackened fingers. Rhaegar listened to these accounts each night, conferring with Ned Stark and the other lords. Tension rose, but no large-scale attack came. Some men began to doubt the threat again, wondering if they'd been called north for a phantom menace. Then, in the darkest hour of a moonless night, Winterfell's watchmen saw torches flickering on the northern horizon. A band of riders approached at a gallop, a horn blowing ragged blasts. Rhaegar, roused from sleep, threw on a fur-lined cloak and hurried to the courtyard. Ned arrived moments later, sword in hand, expression grim. The gates opened, letting in half-frozen rangers of the Night's Watch. One fell from his horse, limbs stiff, as others tried to help him. Rhaegar knelt beside the fallen man. "Summon a maester," he barked at a guard. Ned crouched too, holding the man's head. His eyes were wide with terror, lips blue from the cold. Another ranger, still mounted, called out hoarsely, "They're coming!" A force of whites, wildlings turned. An army, we barely outran them. Might reach the gift by morning. Madness. The courtyard erupted in frantic motion. Men yelled, running for weapons. Ned's face set in a grim mask. Rhaegar stood, heart pounding. So the day had come. The real confrontation, not scattered rumors or single walkers. If the ranger's words held truth, an army of the dead marched for the land south of the wall. Rhaegar raised his voice, commanding calm. "Bring them inside. Tend to their wounds. Ser Jaime, rouse the lords. We march at dawn. Ned, dispatch ravens to Castle Black. Tell them we ride to their aid. If the whites are in the gift, the wall alone won't hold them back. The living must stand together." Memamtoine. Ned nodded sharply, calling for maesters and ravens. Snow whirled in the courtyard, the night air biting. Rhaegar glanced at the unconscious ranger, half buried in cloaks. This was no distant possibility now. War with the dead was upon them. As men scattered to gather arms and armor, Rhaegar felt something fierce awaken in his chest. Perhaps it was the old prophecy, or the simple duty of a king. He would meet this threat head-on, as he had once met Robert Baratheon on the Trident. Only this time, the foe was beyond mortal. And if the realm failed here, no Targaryen crown or Stark honor would matter. He turned, gripping Ned Stark's forearm. "We face the long night," Rhaegar said quietly. "But we face it together." Ned's eyes were dark as a winter sky. Together, for the living. All through that night, horns sounded, men readied themselves. Fires roared in every hearth, forging swords and arrowheads from obsidian. Lords donned armor while their bannermen shivered in the snowy courtyard. Horses stamped, breath steaming. Rhaenys insisted on taking up a bow, determined to play her part. Rhaegar told her to remain behind for safety, but she refused, pointing out that many other lords and ladies of the north fought beside their families. In the end, He could not deny her. The realm would need every willing hand. Before the pale light of dawn spread across the sky, the assembled host of Winterfell filed out in a great column. Thousands of men, many on horseback, some on foot, all headed north. The sound of hooves crunching snow, wagons squeaking, and men murmuring prayers accompanied them. Above it all flew the banners of the living. The dragon of Targaryen, the direwolf of Stark, the crowned stag of Baratheon. Though Stannis himself was not present, some of his lords were, the falcon of Aerys, the rose of Tyrell, and many more. A tapestry of color against the white snow, unified under the king's command. Rhaegar rode at the vanguard with Ned Stark and several other high lords. A hush fell as they passed beyond Winterfell's outskirts into the open wilderness. The sun, weak and cold, rose behind clouds. Frost rimed every branch. They pressed on. By midday, word came from a forward scout that the ranger's description was accurate. There were whites massing near an abandoned holdfast in the Gift, only half a day's ride away. The king halted the column, conferring with Ned. They decided to approach carefully, sending outriders to circle wide. The terrain was rolling hills, dotted with leafless trees and patches of deep snow. If an army of the dead truly waited, they must not blunder into it unprepared. Rhaegar dispatched a small party to lure any whites into a choke point where the main host could strike. Men with torches and obsidian weapons readied themselves. Tension crackled in the frigid air. Finally, near dusk, they topped a ridge and looked down on a shallow valley. An old holdfast, half collapsed, stood near the frozen bank of a creek. What they saw made hearts pound. A crowd of shambling figures, dozens upon dozens, maybe 100 or more, lurched around the ruins, some dragging limbs, others unnaturally quick. Their flesh was pallid, in places black with frostbite, eyes a glowing blue. They clawed and hissed at one another, apparently waiting for some impetus. A few watchers at the perimeter sported tattered cloaks of wildling make. In the far distance, shapes moved in the gathering dark, suggesting even more beyond sight. Rhaegar swallowed hard. A hush fell among the living as they beheld undeniable proof of the threat. His breath misted before him. Ned Stark hissed through his teeth. Gods, there are so many. This is only a fraction, I fear. Bound. Sir Jaime Lannister, at Rhaegar's side, gripped his sword hilt. Our men can handle them, unless they have some unnatural trick. You said fire is the best weapon. Fire and dragonglass, Rhaegar confirmed. Let's do this right. Archers first, with obsidian-tipped arrows. Then our footmen carrying torches and spears. Cavalry on the flanks if they break ranks. And gods be with us. He glanced at Ned. Send the signal. Trumpets sounded across the ridge, and the living advanced. Archers found vantage points, lighting pitch-soaked cloth around their arrowheads. As the whites began to stir, hissing in unholy unison, the first volley arced through the wintry sky, trailing sparks. They fell among the dead in a flurry of flame and obsidian. Many whites collapsed, limbs twitching, some igniting with unnatural shrieks. Yet the others rushed forward, scrabbling over fallen logs and half-buried stones at an alarming pace. The living braced themselves. Rhaegar drew his sword, heart hammering. The Targaryen steel gleamed in the failing light. He spurred his horse forward, Ned Stark beside him. The footmen closed ranks, torchlight wavering as the whites slammed into their line. A macabre battle erupted in the snow. The whites fought without fear or pain, clawing and biting. Swords of steel sometimes cut them down, but they rose again unless the blow was fatal to the head or an obsidian blade ended them. Shouts of alarm and horror mingled with the whites' ghastly cries. The reek of decay and the tang of blood filled the air. Rhaegar slashed at a lunging corpse, severing its neck. A sickening black ichor spurted. The body fell, but the dismembered arms still twitched in the snow. Another white came from the side, jaws snapping. He turned, parrying with difficulty, nearly unhorsed. Sir Jaime rode in, golden blade flashing. He lopped off the white's head, sending it rolling. Across the field, men with torches pressed them against writhing bodies, setting them aflame. Screeches filled the air. The stench was overwhelming. Ned Stark's bannermen held a defensive line, brandishing spears tipped with obsidian. Rhaegar saw one white impaled, convulsing as if the black glass burned it from within. Another volley of flaming arrows hissed overhead, striking more of the undead. Some fell, smoldering. Others came on relentlessly, even with limbs severed. A cluster of whites nearly overwhelmed a group of southern knights, until a swirl of mounted Northmen crashed into them from the flank, hacking the creatures down. Still, for every white destroyed, it seemed two more pressed in from the darkness. The living fought with desperate valor. Rhaenys, perched atop a horse at the rear, loosed arrow after arrow, each tip obsidian. She displayed a sure eye, felling white after white. Lord Royce bellowed commands, rallying frightened men. The combined might of the realm hammered against the undead horde. Slowly, the wave of whites began to thin, though the cost was high. Bodies of living men dotted the ground, some already stirring again as new whites, if they had not been given a burning blow. The horror of it jolted men's courage. They fought on, determined not to let their own comrades rise again as abominations. Then, from the gloom near the holdfast ruins, shapes more frightening emerged. Pale figures tall and gaunt, clad in icy armor, eyes like starlight. The White Walkers themselves. One raised a sword of swirling ice, pointing it toward the living. A chill wind swept across the battlefield, and the shrieks of the whites intensified as if guided by their masters. Rhaegar spurred his horse, roaring for the men to hold formation. He glimpsed Ned Stark cutting down a white with a torch, then turning to stare at the walker. Ned's face was pale, but he steeled himself, raising his sword. The walker moved with inhuman grace, sliding across the snow with silent steps. It parried Ned's strike with a ringing crash, frost spreading along Ned's blade. Rhaegar galloped closer, determined to help. Another walker appeared from behind a crumbled wall, sending a spear of ice hurtling at a group of men. One knight was skewered, instantly frozen from within. He shattered when he hit the ground. Gasps of horror rippled among the living. Rhaenys, seeing this from afar, loosed an obsidian arrow, but the walker spun, knocking it aside mid-air with contemptuous ease. Fear threatened to break the living lines. Rhaegar forced calm. They had prepared for this. "Archers, target the pale ones," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Dragonglass arrows." He rode up behind the walker, dueling Ned. Before the creature could land a killing blow, Rhaegar swung his sword. The walker turned impossibly fast, raising its ice blade. The two weapons met with a shriek like nails on glass. Rhaegar's steel cracked at the edge, the shock reverberating up his arms. Cold radiated from the walker's sword. He nearly lost his grip. Ned seized the moment, driving a torch against the walker's side. It recoiled, hissing. Steam rose from its icy flesh. From the ridge, another volley of obsidian-tipped arrows arced down. Some soared wide, others struck whites. A precious few found the walkers. One walker took an arrow in the shoulder and stumbled, letting out an unearthly screech as its form splintered into shards of ice that dissolved into swirling snow. Encouraged, the living poured on. Rhaegar and Ned pressed their advantage, striking at the walker engaged with them. The creature's eyes burned with ancient malice. It parried again, fracturing more steel from Rhaegar's sword. But Ned's blow with a dragonglass dagger found the walker's flank. A spiderweb of cracks spread across its torso. The walker shuddered and exploded into a fine mist of ice crystals, leaving only a faint whisper on the wind. A moment of stunned relief passed between them. They had slain a white walker. Then they heard fresh screams from the far side of the field. Another walker had broken the line, slaughtering men left and right with an icy greatsword. White surged behind it. Rhaenys, seeing the carnage, urged her horse forward. Obsidian arrow knocked. She let fly. The shot soared in a graceful arc, but the walker spun fluidly, slicing the arrow out of the air. Before Rhaenys could string another arrow, the walker lifted an arm. Icy wind surged. Her horse reared, flinging her from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, breath knocked out. Rhaegar saw it happen. He roared, spurring his horse across the blood-stained snow. Ned followed, face etched with alarm. Soldiers tried to bar the walker's path, but it cut them down. Shards of ice spraying. Rhaenys pushed herself up, scrabbling for her bow, but the walker loomed over her, raising that shimmering blade. She stared up, defiance in her eyes. Before the walker could strike, a figure hurtled forth from the swirl of melee. A young soldier in black, carrying a spear with an obsidian tip. His features were half hidden by a hood, but Rhaegar glimpsed black hair, pale skin, gray eyes. With a cry, the boy thrust the spear into the walker's back. The creature twisted, letting out a rasping hiss. Frost crept along the spear's haft. Yet the obsidian found its mark. Cracks spread across the walker's torso. It turned, trying to slash at its attacker, but the boy jumped back just in time. With a final shriek, the walker shattered into swirling fragments. Icy dust coated the ground. Rhaenys scrambled upright, heart pounding. The boy in black turned to check on her. Rhaegar, galloping near, saw the boy's face fully now. Jon Snow, Dotakater, Ned Stark's bastard. Though as Rhaegar stared into that face, a fierce pang of recognition gripped him. The lad was older than he'd realized, around 14. He had the dark hair of the Starks, but behind his gray eyes, Rhaegar sensed something else, something intangible. A piece of Lyanna. For a heartbeat, time froze, and Rhaegar felt as though he looked upon a living echo of the woman he had loved. The woman who had died so long ago. Jon Snow, breathing hard, offered a hand to Rhaenys. She took it, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she managed, still shaking. He nodded quickly, stepping back as if he was unsure of his place. Rhaegar dismounted and approached them, relief flooding him to see Rhaenys alive. He grasped her shoulders, checking her for injury. Then he turned to Jon Snow, emotion roiling within him. "You saved her life. You fought bravely." He realized his voice trembled slightly. "Thank you." Jon ducked his head, uncertain. "She needed help," he said simply, face reddening. Then, remembering courtesy, he added, "Your grace." Men poured in around them, rallying. Another volley of obsidian arrows rained down. The remaining wights broke, either destroyed or retreating toward deeper woods. Slowly, the living overcame them. The air smelled of smoke and rotten flesh. Corpses, true corpses, no longer animated, littered the valley. Many men lay among them, never to rise. The White Walkers that had appeared were destroyed, thanks to obsidian and quick action. The battered host found itself victorious, though at a terrible cost. In the aftermath, Rhaegar surveyed the battlefield. Night pressed in, though torches and the glow of smoldering pyres cast flickering light across the snow. Men gathered the wounded, ensuring none slipped into death without burning their bodies. The fallen wights had to be destroyed fully. One of Ned's bannermen hurried to decapitate the corpses, feeding them into hastily built bonfires. Soot and steam rose into the starless sky. Ned Stark approached, face etched with sorrow. "We've lost many, but we won. We truly faced the others and lived." He paused, eyes flicking to the spot where Jon Snow stood awkwardly near Rhaenys. "He saved your daughter, I see." Rhaegar nodded, letting out a breath. "Jon Snow, he's very brave. You've raised him well, Ned." A muscle twitched in Ned's jaw. He glanced at Jon with an expression that mingled pride, fear, and something deeper. Rhaegar wanted to speak further, to ask if Jon was truly who he suspected, but this was not the time. They were still in the midst of horror. Men around them moaned in pain, some missing limbs. The king forced his personal questions aside. "Duty first, always. Let's make camp, tend our wounded. Tomorrow we'll see if more of the undead lurk nearby," Rhaegar said. Ned agreed, and they set about organizing the aftermath. Rhaenys, though rattled, helped light fires and bring bandages to the maesters. Jon Snow disappeared into the swirl of black-clad watchers, as though he wasn't sure where else he belonged. By morning, the living had established a secure perimeter around the battered holdfast. Scouts found tracks indicating more wights might be scattered in the surrounding wilderness, but no sign of additional White Walkers. Many concluded that the others had tested the watchers with a probing attack. A sense of grim resolve settled on the men. The others were real, their whites unstoppable save for fire and dragon glass. Yet the living had prevailed once. If they could stand firm together, perhaps they had a chance. In the days that followed, Rhaegar oversaw burials for the dead. Actually, burnings. The raw stench of funeral pyres lingered. He made sure to honor each regent's fallen with appropriate rites. The realm's lords saw at last that the threat was no mere myth. Even the doubters from the Vale and the Stormlands seemed convinced. Messages were sent south, urging more men and supplies. The king declared that until the threat was banished, the allied host would remain in the north, prepared to march to the wall if needed. Some lords bristled, but none defied him after what they witnessed. Among the watchers, talk of Jon Snow's heroism spread. They called him the bastard who slew a walker, half in awe, half in curiosity. Rhaenys asked about him often, wanting to thank him properly. Rhaegar too found himself yearning to speak with the lad. Yet Jon kept to the fringes, as if uncertain of his place. When Rhaegar finally sought him out, he found Jon aiding the maesters in tending the wounded. The boy stood near a collapsed soldier, carefully feeding him water. Rhaegar waited until Jon finished, then approached. "You do good work here," he said quietly. Jon looked startled, bowing his head. Rhaegar continued, "I wanted to commend you again for saving Princess Rhaenys. You wielded that dragon glass spear like a knight. Where did you learn?" "Bendham." Jon shrugged shyly. "My father, Lord Stark, said we should always carry dragon glass in the north, now that these threats are known. I've been practicing with the men of the Night's Watch whenever we had a chance. The rest was luck, I suppose." Rhaegar studied him more closely. The lines of his face, the shape of his jaw, there was a resemblance to Lyanna that gnawed at Rhaegar's heart. He forced himself not to pry. "Luck or not, you acted with courage. Your father must be proud." "Deadwater Mile." Jon's expression flickered with a complicated mix of emotions. "He said he was. But father, he's always so solemn." Then, seeming to remember whom he was speaking to, he straightened. "Thank you, Your Grace. I only did what was right." Rhaegar nodded, swallowing the urge to ask if Jon knew anything of his parentage. The time was not right. "Still, you have my gratitude. I've told Rhaenys you deserve a royal thanks and a boon. If there is anything you wish, within reason, ask, and it shall be granted." Jon hesitated. "I only wish to serve. Perhaps, if more men marched to the wall, I could join them? The Night's Watch might benefit from younger recruits." Rhaegar frowned slightly. The boy was so young, with potential for a better life. "You do not aspire to knighthood, or a place among your father's household knights?" Jon's eyes flicked away. "I'm just a bastard," he said in a hollow tone. "I have no right to a high place. The Watch is where bastards can rise by their own merits. It's the place I belong." Rhaegar's heart twisted. He thought of all the complexities swirling around Jon's birth. If indeed he was Lyanna's son, then he was no mere bastard. Yet Rhaegar had no proof, no certain knowledge of how Ned had concealed it. He dared not cast doubt on Ned Stark's long-chosen story, nor unravel the realm's stability over it. "We'll speak of this later, once the war is done," he said. "For now, do what you feel is honorable. If you truly desire the black, I won't stand in your way, but you have time to decide." Jon bowed again. "Yes, Your Grace," he said quietly, then slipped away. Rhaegar watched him go, a swirl of conflicting emotions in his chest. Duty, guilt, protectiveness, and the faint sting of hope. He wondered if Ned Stark had guessed this moment would come, if that was why he'd given Rhaegar those cryptic genealogies. Would claiming Jon as a Targaryen do more harm than good, especially now, with the realm perched on the edge of cataclysm? Days turned to weeks. The living continued to fortify. Regular patrols roved the Gift and beyond, sometimes clashing with pockets of whites. The White Walkers themselves kept a distance, as if testing the allied host. Meanwhile, the realm responded to the dire news. More lords arrived with men or sent shipments of dragon glass. Tywin Lannister, from afar, contributed gold to finance additional supplies, though he conspicuously stayed in the west. Stannis Baratheon sent a modest force from Storm's End, led by his castellan, though Stannis himself did not appear. The Vale, the Riverlands, and the Reach had large contingents present, though they grumbled about the hardships of a northern winter. In total, the king's muster at Winterfell swelled to tens of thousands, a formidable force, if it could be kept fed and unified. One bone-chilling morning, a new raven arrived from the Shadow Tower, the westernmost fortress of the Wall. It reported a mass of wildlings, thousands, gathering in the haunted forest, led by a self-styled king beyond the wall, named Mance Rayder. He purportedly sought passage south for his people, claiming he wanted to flee the White Walkers. If the living refused, he threatened to force his way through. Rhaegar read the letter with Ned, feeling the weight of a realm's choices once again. If these wildlings truly faced the others, might they be allies instead of enemies? Or were they just opportunists, eager to raid? Against the advice of some southern lords, Rhaegar decided to parley. He would ride with a contingent of knights to the Wall, meet Mance Rayder, and see if an accord could be reached. Ned supported this. They reasoned that if the wildlings joined the fight against the others, it could be a boon. If not, better to face them now than fight on two fronts. The realm held its breath as Rhaegar prepared for the journey north. Rhaenys insisted on coming, but this time, Rhaegar forbade it. The risk was too great. She argued, but he overruled her. He needed her safe in Winterfell to help coordinate if anything befell him. So the king and a select party rode to Castle Black. The swirl of black-clad brothers greeted them grimly. Jean Mormont had never been happier to see so many southern swords. The old bear pointed north from atop the wall, indicating where Mance's host camped in the icy wilderness. Rhaegar gazed out across a sea of white. A thin line of smoke in the distance marked the wildling fires. This was the frontier between the known realm and the unknown. He swallowed, recalling that the real enemy was the others, not these living men. If Mance Rayder could be turned to their side, it might save thousands of lives. The meeting was arranged on a stretch of snowy ground beneath the towering edifice of the Wall. Mance arrived with a handful of wildling chieftains, fierce, fur-wrapped figures with haggard faces. Women walked among them, equally fierce, carrying spears. They eyed the southern knights warily. Mance himself was lean, dark-haired, and surprisingly calm in demeanor. He wore a patchwork cloak of black and gray, no crown save the confidence in his bearing. Rhaegar emerged with Eddard Stark and a few knights, no more than 10 men. They stood in the snow, the breath of both groups misting the air. Mance surveyed Rhaegar, taking in his regal attire, silver hair bound back, a Targaryen cloak trimmed with fur, the ancient sword at his side. Then the wildling king spoke in a direct husky voice. "So you're the dragon king we've heard about, the one who slew the usurper long ago, and wants to save us from ghosts in the night." "Mustamor." Rhaegar replied evenly, "I'm the king of the 7 kingdoms, yes. I come not to force you back, but to see if we share a common foe in the others." Mance's dark eyes glinted. "We do. My people have seen them. They took whole villages, left only dead husks. We can't stay beyond the Wall. We'd be slaughtered, so we come south, where men at least have a chance to fight. Will you let us pass?" Eddard Stark spoke up. "Your people have raided the north for generations. Southern lords fear you'll burn their villages. Why should we trust you?" Mance gave a half-smile. "Because if we wanted to raid, we'd do it in smaller numbers, not by dragging every clan from here to the frozen shore. We come with our families, our elders, our babes. We want refuge, not war." He gestured at the sea of wildlings behind him, ragged lines of men, women, children, Daiko. "All we ask is a place to live south of the Wall. We'll fight the others if it comes to that, or any threat that hunts the living." Rhaegar considered his words. If he allowed thousands of wildlings to pass, it would anger many lords. But if the alternative was forcing them to remain beyond the Wall, they might join the others by default, or be destroyed, only to rise as new whites. "I'll make you an offer," he said slowly. Swear fealty to the crown, at least an alliance of arms against the others, and cease raiding. We will grant you land in the gift, under the Watch's authority. Your warriors must help defend the wall. You'll become part of the realm in exchange for peace." A murmur rippled through the wildlings. They disliked bending the knee. Mance hesitated, then answered quietly. "We free folk. We bow to no kings, but maybe we can come to an arrangement. We'll fight with you against the White Walkers, on equal footing, not as your subjects. Give us farmland, we can hold ourselves, and no lord but our own chosen chiefs. We won't raid if we have no need." He shrugged. "I don't expect your lords to like it, but that's my price." Ned frowned. "This is a hard bargain. The North will not welcome thousands of free folk with open arms. There's old hatred here. But the alternative might be worse." Rhaegar. Rhaegar studied Mance's face, searching for deceit. The man's gaze was steady, resolute. He truly feared the others more than the South. After a long silence, Rhaegar said, "We can work out details. The realm is large, and farmland in the gift is underused. But you must swear not to raid or pillage. In exchange, we'll share in the harvest, and you will fight when called upon. If you break faith, the consequences will err." Mance turned to confer with his chieftains. Harsh voices argued in low, guttural tones. Some spat on the ground, cursing. Others seemed relieved. Finally, Mance faced Rhaegar again. "We'll accept. The free folk stand with the rest of the living. The cold gods are the enemy." Rhaegar nodded. "Then let us record it in writing, though I doubt your people rely on parchment." A small smile curved his lips, though tension lay beneath. "Together we stand." They sealed the arrangement with a handshake in the snow. Ned Stark exhaled, relief and trepidation mingling. On the wall above, black-cloaked archers watched, no doubt stunned by the sight of their king forging an alliance with wildlings. But these were desperate times, requiring bold measures. The next day saw an unprecedented migration, the free folk streaming through Castle Black, each group accounted for by the Night's Watch, then assigned to a portion of land in the gift. The Watch, though uneasy, recognized that many hands might strengthen them if the others attacked in force. The living came together, Southerners, Northerners, and wildlings. It was a union that had seemed impossible for centuries. If anything could stand against the White Walkers, it might be this ragged alliance. Rhaegar returned to Winterfell to coordinate the final steps, a swirling chaos of logistics. Word spread that the king had allowed wildlings into the realm. Some southern lords threatened to withdraw their support, outraged at the idea. Rhaegar stood firm. He reminded them of the battle they had just fought in the gift, the whites they had seen with their own eyes. "Would you prefer the wildlings join the ranks of the dead?" he asked pointedly. That ended most objections. Spring was still far off. The nights remained long and cold. Yet rumors spoke of movement deeper in the icy north, as if the others gathered strength in hidden places. Scouts rarely returned from beyond the frost fangs. Mance Rayder said more clans would come south, fleeing the creeping horror. The lords braced themselves for a final, larger confrontation. Anxiety haunted every campfire. Yet in that grim tension, the living forged bonds of necessity. Men from the Reach stood guard beside wildling warriors, who once might have killed them without a thought. Northmen shared salt beef with knights from the Vale. Rhaenys patrolled with a detachment of archers that included a free folk huntress. Barriers of accent and custom crumbled before the universal fear of death beyond death. One cold evening, Rhaegar walked the ramparts of Winterfell with Ned Stark. Torchlight flickered on the stone. Far off in the courtyard, men huddled around braziers. From the training yard came the clang of steel, late-night drills. Overhead, the sky stretched black and infinite. Rhaegar paused to look north, where the horizon was hidden by darkness. It's been months since we fought that battle in the gift. Still no sign of a larger host. Sometimes I wonder if we've done enough, or if the real war is yet to come. Nestrepo. Ned clasped his hands behind his back. We've done all we can, united the kingdom, armed ourselves, brought the free folk into the fold. We've proven we can kill White Walkers. If they come, we'll face them. We must trust in the men we've gathered." Rhaegar nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "I recall once reading an ancient line, 'When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives.' That's House Stark saying, is it not?" A small smile touched Ned's lips. "Close enough. My father used to say it as a reminder to stick together. That is exactly what we're doing." Then he hesitated. "Rhaegar, if we prevail, if we live to see another spring, there are matters we should speak of. Jon, for one." Rhaegar's heart fluttered. He met Ned's gaze. "Yes, I sense he's not just your bastard. He saved my daughter's life. He fights like a man meant for a higher destiny." "Worst, Teddy." Ned exhaled. "When this war is over, I'll tell you everything. We can decide what's best for him and the realm. But for now, let's focus on survival." Rhaegar agreed. "When the day of victory dawns, we will speak. 7 help us see that day." They gazed into the night. In the hush, an icy wind blew across the walls. Far away, the others might be marshalling. Within Winterfell, steel sang. All around Westeros, men and women held their breath for the final reckoning. Yet for the first time in living memory, the realm was truly united, Targaryen and Stark. Lannister gold supporting them from afar. The Vale, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Ironborn reluctantly, and even the Free Folk, all braced against a greater enemy. Rhaegar said a silent prayer that this alliance would hold, that their combined strength would be enough. That night, in a small corner of the great library, Rhaegar found himself drawn again to the genealogies Ned had given him. He flipped through the pages by candlelight, settling on the embroidered cloth, showing a direwolf and dragon intertwined. He thought of the boy with the dragonglass spear, the boy named Jon Snow, who had the face of Lyanna Stark. The old prophecy whispered in his mind. The dragon has 3 heads. The song of ice and fire. For a moment, he almost believed he could see it. A uniting of houses, a forging of destinies to beat back the cold darkness. He closed the bundle and returned it to safekeeping. The future was uncertain, but for the moment, hope glimmered like a distant star. He had defeated Robert Baratheon and rebuilt the 7 kingdoms. Now, he had forged an alliance for the living. He prayed that when the cold winds truly rose and the others marched in all their terrible glory, the realm would stand behind its king, and that together they might bring dawn to the darkest night the world had known in millennia. With that thought, King Rhaegar Targaryen blew out the candle and stepped into the corridor, where the torches burned bright and steady, a small bastion of light against the unyielding dark.